I want to thank all of you for coming out today. This has been an event that we have been working on for some time, and we are very pleased to be able to talk about LGBTQ and aging in Palm Springs, a city that last year was identified as the best place in America for LGBTQ seniors to retire to, and we are committed to keeping it that way. For those of you who do not know, I'm Lisa Middleton. I'm a member of the Palm Springs City Council, and with Mayor Robert Moon departing from the council a couple of weeks ago, I am very proud to say I am the oldest member of the Palm Springs City Council. So our theme today and throughout is going to be about dignity. One of the things that all of us know is that as we go older, we grow more vulnerable. And then there comes a time where all those little aches and pains and things that we have that we've endured and worked through, we suddenly find ourselves in places where we are particularly vulnerable. And for those of us who have a history in our lifetime of knowing discrimination, the thought of being at our most vulnerable at the time when we don't have the strength to fight back in the way that we have fought back previously is a very scary thing. But the good news is that we are making progress in this community and in communities throughout the country in addressing the needs that we have as seniors. This event would not have happened without the support of a number of individuals. Two organizations, though, that are particularly responsible for today happening. SAGE, who you're going to hear from Michael Adams, their executive director, and very frequently you're going to hear today from Hillary Meyer, who has been working with me through many long hours of preparing for this panel. And Hillary, would you stand up just so that I want to give her a round of applause for all of her work. Other organizations that were instrumental in helping to make this happen were the LGBT Center of the Desert, Equality California, the Desert AIDS Project, City of Palm Springs, and Mizell Senior Center. And lastly, folks that were just incredibly cooperative in putting this event together is the Palm Springs Convention Center. We have a number of really outstanding panelists today, and what we are going to do so is to try to keep this as interactive as we can, but stay focused. We're going to be handing out small cards to everyone. If you have a question for a panelist, we'd ask that you write that question down. And Hillary and I will be going through during all of the panels, collecting cards and moving them up to the moderator of that panel so that the moderator can ask the questions and can make sure that your questions do get answered. At the end of the sessions at noon today, when we're all finished, most of the panelists have agreed to stay until 1 o'clock this afternoon, and we have the room until 1 so that you can ask your questions of any of the panelists one-on-one. And with that, I want to get a little audience participation, and I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, but if you have been out for over 25 years, would you stand up? Look at that. And how many of you have been out for over 30 years? Let's keep standing. And over 40 years? And over 50 years. Continue to stand. Let's all give applause to these gentlemen. After 25, 30, 40, and 50 years of being out, we are not going back into the closet in our last years. With that, I would like to introduce Michael Adams, the CEO of SAGE. He's been CEO since 2006. SAGE has been devoted to doing the work of protecting LGBT seniors and enhancing the rights of LGBTQ seniors, and making sure that each and every one of us has an opportunity to live out our lives with dignity, with respect, and with the opportunity to be our best until our last days. Michael.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is really wonderful to see so many of you here this morning for this incredible first inaugural LGBTQ Aging Symposium here in Palm Springs. And I want to start by giving just a tremendous and heartfelt thank you to Councilmember Lisa Middleton for her extraordinary leadership in this community, in everything that she does, and certainly I would say in particular, it has been a tremendous honor for SAGE to partner with the council member in organizing this program. I also would like to give a shout out to a board member of SAGE in Palm Springs, Elliot Cernell. Elliot had the inspiration of introducing the council member and I a while back, and we started this conversation, and she had this idea of this symposium, and it has just been a beautiful collaboration since then. For those of you who don't know, as the council member indicated, SAGE was founded and exists to serve and advocate with and for our elders, older folks in our community. We're a national organization that was founded 41 years ago, and we have the honor and privilege of working with tremendous partners all across the country, including here locally, and including through our affiliation with Center of the Desert and the Sage of the Desert affiliations. So we're really honored for that work. I think it's especially appropriate that we're coming here together as we close out the last days of 2019. In 2019, we have celebrated and marked and remembered the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which many see as the beginning of the modern LGBT rights movement. And so 50 years ago, as we know from our history and our community's history, in June of 1969, a group of, at the time, young people, right, who were in a bar, who were there to socialize and to find relief from the oppression and marginalization and discrimination of their era, finally had enough that night and stood up and said, no more. No more to police violence, no more to invisibility, no more to discrimination, and pushed back. And we as a community have been pushing back ever since, pushing back for our rights, for our equality, and for our full citizenship. And of course, we know that those young folks today are our elders. We know that our elders, we call our elders and folks who are of that generation the Stonewall generation, because of the bravery and the perseverance and the courage that so many folks in our community have shown through decades of challenges and difficulty and obstacles. And at SAGE, our slogan at SAGE is, we refuse to be invisible, because we believe that as we grow old, we have earned the right to be recognized for who we are and to be treated with the respect that we deserve. And we believe at Sage that our elders are our heroes, our pioneers, the people who have made it possible for me as a gay man to stand here with the freedoms that I have, and for all of us to continue to grow in our freedoms and how we live our lives. And we're fortunate, I think many of us here know, here in Palm Springs, that many of us as we age are thriving and having wonderful experiences and wonderful lives, as we should. And it is also the case. It is also the case that far too many of us as we age are facing quite serious challenges. Far too many of us as we age are growing old, isolated, and without the support that we need. And we know what some of that feels like and what some of those reasons are. We know that we're much less likely to be parents and have adult children than older Americans in general, and that in fact we're more likely to grow old single. And in a country where adult children and partners are the primary sources of support and care, that can be isolating, right, for us as we age. We also know in our experience that far too many older folks in our community are growing old without the resources they need, without the financial resources, without the support networks, and that these scenarios often create a greater need for services, for professional services and professional care. And at the same time, far too often when we seek out those services and that care, we don't find open arms and we don't find welcoming spaces. Now, fortunately, this is a community that is on the forefront of creating those welcoming experiences in a state that is on the forefront. And even here, we still have so much work to do. And certainly across the country, we have so much work to do. We are still dealing with high levels of discrimination. A study was done 4 years ago by a national organization called the Equal Rights Center, and that study focused on to what degree is there discrimination in senior rental housing against older folks from our communities, and found through that study that across the country, 48% of LGBT older people who apply for senior rental housing are subjected to discrimination. 48%. Imagine that, and that is not just a statistic, that is real life. Some of you may have heard of the story of Mary Walsh and Bev Nance in St. Louis, and I want to lift that up as a reminder of just how much more work we need to do. Mary and Bev are a lesbian couple who've been together for more than 40 years, live in St. Louis, decided it was time to move into a continuing care retirement community. Identified one in St. Louis. It was a nice community, was affordable, was a place they wanted to live. Started going through the entire process. We're very excited about moving in. And at the very end of the process, this continuing care retirement community, which ironically is called Friendship Village, at the very end of this process, they were told that they would not be admitted because their relationship does not qualify as a biblical marriage. Right. So these are the kinds of obstacles we face, and I wish I could say that that was an isolated and rare case, but it's not, and we'll talk more about some of these other challenges as we move forward today. But having said that, as the council member indicated, we are making great progress. California, the state of California, is leading the country in terms of the adoption of legal protections and public policies that can make our lives better as we grow old, and we'll talk about that a little later today in one of the panels. Organizations like Center of the Desert and many others are providing a growing array of services and supports for older folks in our community who need that support. SAGE's national training program, which is called Sage Care, has trained thousands of elder care providers across California in how to work effectively and respectfully with folks in our community who need care. And last April, we at SAGE were very proud to announce a partnership with the Human Rights Campaign to launch something called the Long-Term Care Equality Index, which will provide essentially a rating system where we can rate long-term care care providers in every community across the country and how well they are treating members of our community. So there is great progress being made, and we need to build on that progress. And that's why we're here today. That's why we're here today. As Councilmember Middleton indicated, and this is something I think we can all be so proud of, Palm Springs has been voted the most popular place for older members of our community to come and retire. And here today we have the opportunity to talk about how we can build on that success, how we can build on that success and keep on expanding the progress here so that Palm Springs continues to be a beacon for the entire rest of the country in terms of what it means to create a model LGBT age-friendly community. That's the opportunity that we have here. And you will be hearing from an amazing, amazing collection of experts in many of the topics that we'll be talking about today. It's a very, very impressive group of speakers that I'm certainly looking forward to listening to, and I know that you will be interested as well. We will have panels focused on social isolation, on HIV and aging, on what it means to have culturally competent care available to us as we age, and how we find that care, on the importance of affirming and affordable housing for us as we age, and how we ensure that housing exists and how we're able to access it, and the state of legal and policy protections for us as we grow older. So it is going to be an incredibly rich series of conversations. Our goals here, I think, are to keep building that focus on us, on our challenges as we age and how we can address them together, to exchange ideas with each other, to learn from our panelists, and to leave here today more prepared, more informed, and more energized for the work that we all can do together to ensure that our own aging experience is what we deserve as people who have lived good, long, in some cases hard lives, and deserve to have our older years truly be golden years. How we can work together to ensure that kind of life, and how we can work together as a community to make Palm Springs and every community in California, and ultimately every community in this country, a place where LGBT older folks are welcome and can find the supports and the services and the respect and the love that we deserve. So thank you very much, and I look forward to a very, very exciting set of conversations today. And with that, I'd like to introduce Hillary Meyer from SAGE, who'll be moderating the first panel on social isolation. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Hillary Meyer from SAGE, who'll be moderating the first panel on social isolation. Thank you.
All right, come on up. All right, hello everyone, good morning. What a beautiful group. I'm gonna have Brian DeVries and Candace Nichols join me up here for our first panel. For those, oh good, you found the agendas. They're all gone, I see. The bios of the panelists are in the agenda, so flip through. I suggest you do so. They're quite impressive. So as folks are getting settled here, I want to just reiterate my thanks to all who made this possible, and want to really lift up Eisenhower Medical Center, who without them, we would not be having this lovely breakfast in this lovely space with this lovely signage and so forth. So we really appreciate Eisenhower Medical Center's contributions to our panel here. Oh, we're not doing that. Okay. All right. So with that, either way, whichever you're more comfortable with, I'm going to moderate the panel, and we're going to be talking about LGBT aging and social isolation. And so just to keep things in a conversational format, Brian, I'd like to start out with you, if I may, to ask you a question to kick us off. All right? Okay. So you're a researcher. You've amassed a huge amount of research on the subject of LGBTQ people and social isolation. It's a big term. Can you give us an introduction to the topic? What do we mean when we say social isolation? And what is the real scope of the problem?
Good, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So, I'm an academic, and so I think I'll stand.
Yeah, go ahead. These academics.
This feels like home. So social isolation really refers to the absence of contacts, the absence of sort of engagement with others, with institutions, with the community. Social isolation is different than loneliness, in that loneliness is the subjective experience of feeling like there aren't enough people in our lives, whereas social isolation is more the objective description of the absence of connections that are meaningful and important. There's sadly significant research and evidence to show that both are prominent in the lives of LGBT older adults. And I think stigma and discrimination lie at the base of this social isolation and discrimination. Stigma and discrimination lie at the base of the social isolation and loneliness. Think of it, LGBT people, as Michael had said, had long been uncounted in the census or discounted in social policy and religion and the military, all of which are changing, but still have a long history of this kind of neglect. For much of our lives as LGBT older adults, we were excluded from marriage. We found other ways of being in relationships with one another, but we still lack that kind of structure and support that marriage provides, and the over 1,100 federal laws that pertain to marriage that don't pertain to relationships outside of that status. For much of our lives, we're excluded from forming families and often held contentious relationships with our families, either keeping our true selves hidden from them or being shunned for confiding who we are. In response, we formed alternate families, our kind of chosen families. Armistead Maupin adopted the term our logical kin in contrast to our biological kin, which is kind of a clever play on words. But even these social networks, these social relationships lack the respect and access that are afforded to, quote, formal family. And in a family-centric society such as the US, these are significant and exclusions and naturally reduce the pool of others from whom we could cultivate connections and intimate networks. And it's important to note that we've lost many to HIV/AIDS and to violence in the face of shameful government neglect and inattention. In response to all of this, LGBT older adults have shown themselves to be resourceful, thoughtful, political, and caring, and this is a side not to discount. In research that we and others have conducted around the country, we've asked large samples of LGBT persons, what does it mean to be LGBT? What are the positive aspects of being a part of a sexual and gender minority? There's only 6% of respondents who said they couldn't come up with anything, slightly higher amongst transgender respondents. And so that means the vast majority of respondents were able to identify what's positive about their experiences. They spoke of how a life against the grain had really afforded them an opportunity to commit to social justice, to engage a more inclusive worldview, and to develop a type of authenticity and competence that derived from their vast coping experiences. I debated whether or not including this, but I'm going to if I could, that so much of life relates to Broadway for me, and And there was a scene from Torch Song Trilogy. Do many of you remember that show and that movie where, good, thank you, where Arnold, who is played by Harvey Fierstein, who also wrote the script, is in an argument with his mother really about the recognition of the loss of their partners. And he says, I taught myself to sew, to cook, to fix plumbing. I can even pat myself on the back when necessary, so I don't have to ask anyone for anything. There's nothing I need from anyone except for love and respect. And to me, that sums up pretty neatly this kind of experience of LGBT independence, really driven by isolation, driven by discrimination. In a life of having to rely on ourselves, LGBT people have developed a kind of crisis competence, a sort of self-contained self-reliance. I was speaking with Richard Bass, who is the coordinator of PALS, Planning Ahead for LGBT Seniors. Some of you hopefully know of that organization, and it speaks a lot to the issues of which we're speaking this morning. And Richard was saying that this, interestingly, as he often does, that this independence and autonomy that we worked so hard to develop as we were young has now turned into this kind of isolation and loneliness in later life. Those successful strategies of our youth of doing it on our own and not asking anyone for anything sort of ends up having a poor fit in our later years as we become overtaxed by the demands of aging, which include physical, health, mobility, stamina challenges. So we're not used to, or we're out of practice in asking for help. There's a number of studies, a large number of studies, and Michael referenced this already, that point to the greater likelihood of being single in later life. This is especially true of gay and transgender persons. In research we've done, it's been up to 4 times more likely to be single. A unique group of gay men were 4 times more likely to never have had a partner than any of the other groups. Relatedly, LGBT older adults, as Michael also had said, are less likely to have children. In our study, in a large study in San Francisco of over 600 older LGBT people, only 15% had children. And interestingly, of that 15%, 60%, 2/3 almost, said their children were not available to help them. This often conflicted family dynamic of older LGBT people is associated with fewer family members in general on whom to call in times of need in later life. Again, particularly the case we found for transgender people as well as for gay men. Friends have often filled that void. We saw this especially during the early years of HIV and AIDS, when gay men and notably lesbians rose to the challenge to provide care for a group of people who were neglected by their health profession, neglected by their families, neglected by so many others. But some of our recent research shows a reticence on the part of LGBT older people to call upon this community, even as many of us stand ready to be called. This absence of a safety net has left too many LGBT people isolated. Previous research has found that social and health services are built around this traditional model of providing support. Relatedly, we found, and Michael already previewed as well, that many LGBT people are hesitant to seek out the care of physicians or to seek senior housing, for example, or even mental health professionals for fear of the discrimination they would encounter upon receiving such care. In fact, over 80% of a large study of LGBT people reported that they feared discrimination, alienation, and even harm if they were to move into assisted living. And relatedly, we found with a very large sample of LGBT persons 50 and older that almost 50% reported they had a disability. That was almost 60% of transgender people. There are also some higher rates of cancer that are found amongst LGBT persons, higher rates of reproductive cancers amongst women, higher rates of anal cancers and HPV-related cancers amongst gay men. Overall, higher rates of poor care and poor self-care. This includes higher rates of smoking and alcohol consumption. And perhaps most sadly telling, A host of studies now reveal much higher rates of depression amongst older gay persons, and again, especially amongst older gay men. Over a third of a large sample that we did, a national sample, reported depressive symptoms at a clinical level, almost half of transgender people. 39%, 39% of the same sample reported that they had seriously considered taking their own lives, 72% of transgender older adults. And well over half of the sample reported that they lacked companionship and reported depression and loneliness at high levels. So these are some of the documented antecedents and costs of social isolation, a community with often higher needs and greater barriers to those needs. But the data also show, and our experience here tells us, that there are resources and strengths to tap in ourselves and in our community. We've done it before, and if we're intentional and if we're open, we could do it again. Care for ourselves and others. Thank you.
All right. What I tell you, he knows what he's talking about, right? So, wow, Brian, thank you very much for a very thorough introduction to the topic. It sets us up nicely for the question that I wanted to ask you, Candace, which is, we hear about the scope of the problem. It feels vast. There are some rays of hope, but there's also a lot of work being done, right, to combat what's happening here, this sort of epidemic in our community. So you're the director of programs at the LGBT Center here, the Center of the Desert. You cover Palm Springs, a wider geographic area. Can you tell us about some of the services that you do offer? What are some ways that you are connecting people to, in fact, work on just that, on the sort of combating of what Brian laid out for us?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying and letting you know what our mission is at the LGBT Community Center of the Desert, and it's to create a vibrant community by helping LGBT people along their way. And as Brian kind of pointed out, there's many ways and many directions that people have come on this long journey, and so we try to be there and to meet people where they are at. There are 3 strategic initiatives that all the programming at the center must embrace, and they are ending isolation and loneliness, connecting people and services, connecting people to community and services, and enriching our individual and collective experiences. All of our program encompasses one or more of these initiatives. And I'm just going to kind of give you a little background of, people see programming and you know that we've got well over 45 to 50 programs that happen on a regular basis and a monthly basis there. But how does all that happen? And it's not just helter-skelter. They are actually, all of our programs fall into 6 different categories that they're grouped into. And they are safety net, which is something you just mentioned too, empowerment, physical health, mental and emotional, social and fun, and life enrichment. And some of those, just to give you an idea of some of those, what those programs are that fall in those individual categories, our safety net programs are like our community food bank, which I'll talk a little bit more later in this about suicide and bullying prevention, job skills training, support group meetings, and we have 12-step programs going on at the center 7 days a week at all different hours. And also Safe Talk, which is a suicide prevention program. Under empowerment, we have programs like Trans Tuesdays, mindfulness and self-awareness training programs, legal resources, and legal resources and immigration help, legal immigration help. HICAP, which is health insurance counseling, when you are trying to find out about Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D, how do I manage it all? We have counselors there where you can make an appointment and get the assistance that you need. Also, things like how to be a man, authentic dating programs. Those are all under empowerment for our community. Physical health, which is very important to our community and keeping very active. We have Tai Chi, 50 plus fit, gentle yoga, better brain and balance, which is something I totally need, is better brain. Because, you know, it just lessens and lessens the older we get. Mental and emotional, surviving prostate cancer, caring for the caregivers. We have 2 caregiver groups. Our general one, which is called Who Cares? And we say we do. We care about our caregivers and they really need help. There's a general caregiving group and there's also a specific LGBT Alzheimer's support group for the caregivers that are giving cares to those with Alzheimer's. Under social and fun, you know, well, actually, I'm going to go to life enrichment first. Life enrichment, we have Spanish, beginning Spanish, intermediate, American Sign Language, drawing classes, meditation, playwriting, painting, artwork. There's all these kind of things that enriches your life. But under social and fun, you know, this is where community centers, they think, oh, they have all these social and fun programs. There's Bridge, Pinochle, men's chat, women's chat, hiking, potlucks, center socials, dance classes, music classes, ukulele, knitting classes. And you know, it's really funny that most folks would think that the social and fun programs are just that. And they're just something to do that's fun and occupy your time. Well, that might be true, but they also play a very significant role in achieving our strategic initiatives. You might think that bridge and hiking and knitting might not think that they're very significant programs or an offering to give, but on the contrary, those kind of programs speak to all 3 of those initiatives, and I'm going to tell you how. When people become involved in these activities, they get, number 1, out of their house. They get out of their house, and so we're addressing that isolation and loneliness. And when they get out of their house and come to the center, guess what? They meet other folks. They meet other folks and they socialize, and that is community, right? Which enriches their individual experience as well as the collective experience of the whole group. I was amazed at our knitting group and how these small groups of friends form and large groups, they are so connected by just sitting and talking and knitting all day. And it just amazed me. I never really thought about the significance of these groups and when it's just a social and a fun program. But they really do have an impact on the individuals. And so they're exposed to each other, you know, and they have to talk to each other. And I think too, you know, I think when you were talking about that isolation and the loneliness, the 2 different things, I know that we still have people that come to our chat groups that are still isolated in some way, even though they are getting out of the house. And I think that's what we need to remember too, because that might be the only time that person does anything social, and the rest of the time they are alone and lonely. And so that's where we try to think of more and more programs that might enhance people to come other times also. And you know, we have a monthly social, which also falls into this category, and for many attending, a social takes a lot of effort and can be a really scary thing. But once they're there, they are open to the possibilities that community brings. And so even when it looks like a program is somewhat fluffy, they do, know that it's rooted in these strategic initiatives, that there is a purpose. The community food bank at the center is, of course, a service that we provide to the community, making sure that folks in our community that are food insecure, which nationally is 1 in 7. Here in Coachella Valley, it's 1 in 6, and I believe in the Williams Institute with LGBT folks, it's 1 in 4 are food insecure. We make sure that they are given the help they need to provide for their families and themselves. But the social aspect of a group of people shopping together on a weekly basis creates community. That was really evident when we did the video for our center stage, and we highlighted one of the participants that utilized the food bank, and it was really about an awareness of the food bank and what we do. But he highlighted the social aspect, that getting out there once a week and going shopping and sitting, they kind of sit in a group first together and then they go in and shop. But they have found their own community there, and they bond together. And that aspect is so important to him that on days when he really doesn't need food or doesn't feel like getting out there, he still will do it for the social aspect. And so it just shows you how important and how we don't even realize that we are creating little pockets of community throughout our very own community. When folks are new to the area and they're seeking community, they often first turn to our women and men's chat group. And this is an opportunity for folks to meet people in a safe and a secure environment that is much smaller than, say, the big social, because our center social is about 300 people. And so that can be very intimidating, but a chat group is anywhere from 8 to 10 to 40 people, depending on the size. And also some of our physical and health programs, such as the 50 Plus Fit and the Tai Chi and yoga in smaller groups where people can feel comfortable and also reap the benefits of staying fit, but also being part of a community. And this past fall, I have to say I was very surprised when music came into our life. We had someone submit a program proposal for a ukulele class. And I thought, okay, what the heck? Let's do a ukulele class and see what happens. Well, before it even started, before the first session even started, we had to put in a second session because the 15 people were already booked up and we had to go to session 2. And session 2 is full also. And, I was just so surprised that so many people would have this interest in ukulele that have never before, gone to any of these classes. But for some reason, it's a cheap instrument, and I think everyone buys one when they go to Hawaii, and then they don't know what to do with it. And so we provided that outlet for them by having this class. But dance classes are like that too. They see I really was able to see the benefits of music and movement because we started a tap class too, which who knew people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s wanted to learn how to tap, but they do. And it's a bond over this newfound interest also that makes that community happen. And if you come into the center ever on a Saturday and you can hear the twanging of ukuleles and they pass each other, the two classes pass each other with the biggest grins on their faces, it really shows you, oh, good. It's right at the end, so it's perfect. But it really shows you that you never know what that connection's going to be. And if your program really, is going to meet the needs of the community, but when you see the smiles on their faces and the community and the connections, you know that you're on the right track to try to end isolation as well as we can.
Great. Thank you, Candace. Really, really helpful. Thank you to everyone who's been putting questions up. There are a few that are related to upcoming panels, so we're not going to get to everyone that has been submitted so far, but there are a number of questions for you, Candace.
Oh,
There's
gosh.
one for you, Brian. Fear not. But two related questions around access at the center, Candace. The first is that there's a need for cultural competency among LGBT centers. Examples include at Latinx community, culturally deaf community, people with various disabilities, non-binary. So what are some of the ways that the center is effectively outreaching to these groups? And then another related question, that was from Richard, another related question from Robert is, for those of our residents who are on limited incomes, fee-based services can be challenging. So what kind of services are people able to participate that have $0 cost?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. There is usually a minimal cost. Our members have a reduced price, and our membership is $25 annually, which is pretty nominal. And then they make that up pretty much throughout the year in the reduction of the class fees. But, we don't usually ever turn anyone away. That's not only at the food bank, but our programs also. We never want to turn people away because they don't have access to funding. So we make sure that there is a way for folks to attend classes even if they have a difficult financial situation. As far as outreaching to the deaf community, and we are of course ADA compliant, and when we have programming that we know, like the HIV and Aging Conference or our Center Stage Conference, we always try to make sure that we have the signing available. And of course, our sign language classes are some of our most popular classes that we have there. But I can honestly say I don't have any specific programming that is outreaching to the deaf community specifically. But if there is a need, I'm always willing to have a program proposal submitted that might be able to address any needs that they find in the community.
Great, and there's one other question that I think I can handle. Any other agencies that are offering programs for zero cost? One of our sponsors here is the Mizell Senior Center. I know they offer a number of different programming options that don't have a price tag.
Yeah, and not all of ours have a price tag also.
Great,
yeah.
Great. Okay, so Brian, here's a question for you. Has there been any research towards supporting those of us in caregiving roles for parents and siblings busy with, as siblings are busy with families?
There's a couple of parts, I think, to that question. One is we have found, we did a large national study that was sponsored by MetLife on LGBT boomers. And in that research, we found that gay men and lesbians were more likely than comparably aged heterosexual children to be caregivers. So interestingly, it's notwithstanding perhaps a kind of conflicted history within the families, there's still a greater likelihood that LGBT people are called upon to be family caregivers, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that, some of which still root in stigma and discrimination. That is, they don't have families or more available, ostensibly, rhetoric like that. So there is some research saying that there's higher likelihood. The nature of support that's provided, there's less on that. There is research on the many careers of caregivers and the extent to which providing care is adding on to what is already a full schedule for so many people, and the nature of care provision, particularly if there's a group, a family, that it's not only the individual providing care and dealing with the kind of history that he or she might have had with a parent, but also they become the broadcasters of that care, and they're open to the criticism of others who are not doing it, but ostensibly could do it better in their eyes. And so all of those conflicts happen too. There are agencies that are around the country, and particularly in California, the Family Caregiver Alliance offers online and other support opportunities and has a specific outreach to LGBT persons. And so they would be a good resource, I think, in this context as well.
Great, thanks, Brian. Candace, another one for you. This seems to be from one of your fans, Alexis, who says that you've lovingly told Alexis that we're always aging. What are the ways in which we can invite, partner, engage younger LGBTQ plus people to address isolation and loneliness for our aging population? And as a center who combines both aging and younger folks, can you tell us some of the ways you've done that?
Well, it's interesting because we're having a dialogue about this in the women and lesbian community and how we can bring those together. In the past, we've had sage tables, which are very much part of the National SAGE program, where we bring, it's an intergenerational breaking of bread, and in that way engaging in conversation with each other. We've done a couple of those, and we were looking at the women's programming, and there's much younger women and older women. It's like, how do we get them together? And we did think that there was that common bond of a SAGE table maybe happening within that group. There's something about breaking bread together and just being casual that really works. And it's interesting in this valley. I'm finding it geographically challenging for some of that group, because I'm finding a lot of the younger folks are further east valley, and then we've got Palm Springs. And if you've lived here for any period of time, you know that people don't like to cross borders here. I mean, Cathedral City is quite a ways away. So it is a challenge, I think, trying to figure out how we can make that happen. But I think the good part is the dialogues are open, and we are trying to find those outlets to combine some of the intergenerational programming, because I think it's really important that our stories get shared, and not just our older seminal kind of stories that we have, having all this wisdom, but us listening to those that are younger than us and finding out where they're at. So I think that balance needs to happen, and it's something that we're striving for. So.
All right, great. And actually with that, we are at time for this panel. There are still some questions I know folks have submitted. Candace and Brian will be here after the formal program, so you're welcome to talk with them afterward.
Oh,
all right,
okay.
Great. So thank you, Candace. Thank you, Brian.
We'll talk to you later.
It's nice to see so many familiar faces here. I'm a little person, and so if you don't mind, I'm going to come down to you and share with you my little PowerPoint. And this is how we move forward.
Yeah,
right?
forward. Yeah, right
Okay.
is forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this is much better. I like to see my audience. So I'm going to be talking about HIV and aging for long-term survivors living with HIV. I'm Jill Gover, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm the behavioral health manager at Desert AIDS Project. I want to start off, and I'm going to dive right into this because I don't have very much time, and I could talk a long time about this subject, which is very passionate to me. I'm very passionate about. There are three categories of long-term survivors. Those who acquired HIV in the 1980s, who have been obviously surviving what we called the plague at a time when there was no medication. This is pre-HAART, antiretroviral therapy. And at that time, as everybody in this room knows, it was a death sentence. And so psychologically, there are very, very different needs today for those who are aging with HIV, who come from this time period, who went through these experiences of traumatic loss, I'll talk about a little bit more. So the psychosocial issues are very different for those people who are pre-heart versus those who are post-heart, the second category. And those people may have been diagnosed after 1996 and have been living with HIV for over 20 years now. So they're long-term survivors as well, but they face very different issues in terms of how they experienced their diagnosis initially and what they went through. In terms of, I often use the analogy of getting through or having gone through the 80s and 90s pre-heart was very much like going through the plague or going through a war. And there's a great deal of trauma that's associated with those kinds of very intense emotional experiences of loss. And I don't want to forget the third category, which is all of those folks who are HIV negative, who are partners, lovers, caregivers, those of us who were right there at the front lines of that war, myself I'm talking about too, who are also aging with secondary trauma. And it's important to remember that category of long-term survivor as well. So long-term survivors have many challenges. And I want to talk first about just a couple of statistics here. I cannot believe it, but we are actually entering in 2020 the 5th decade. Can you believe it? I go, wow, I'm really old. It's pretty amazing. And when we were doing stats a few years ago, in 2015, we talked about in 2020, right? And here we are in 2020. 70% of people living with HIV are over the age of 50. So just as America is graying, so are those who are here today over the age of 50. There's a majority. And of those folks, 94% of people living with HIV who are over 50 have at least one other chronic illness. I mean, this is true for all of us aging. It's generally common to have comorbidities, but an average of 3 conditions, right? So HIV may be a chronic condition, but it's usually one of several as people are aging. So they're dealing with a lot of medical issues, okay? And people over the age of 50 account for 27% of the estimated 26,000 AIDS diagnoses in the United States. And of the estimated 13,000 deaths among people with AIDS, 59% were those over the age of 50. So it gives you an idea of what we're facing. People are still dying, and we still have many challenges, okay? So let me talk just very briefly about the psychological challenges facing long-term survivors. It's really important to remember that those who are pre-heart, especially, went through a really horrific time where developmentally their entire social support network were dying. And it wasn't appropriate because these were people in their 20s and 30s. And people aren't supposed to die in their 20s and 30s, right? And so there was a great deal of loss, a lot of unresolved loss and grief. And this all is traumatic. And people who have sustained trauma manifest it psychologically in these ways. There's, as Dr. DeVries noted, there's a higher percentage of depression, anxiety, emotional numbness, a great deal of anger. Why did this happen? There's also sleep disturbance, insomnia, hypervigilance, substance abuse, low self-esteem, and social withdrawal. And these are all the effects of sustained trauma, the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. There's also survivor's guilt, which has to be addressed, and a tendency to isolate because people become reluctant to form new friendships, new social connections when they've had so much loss. There's still a lot of stigma due to the fear of contagion, and let's not forget the ugly head of ageism, which is still very much alive everywhere. There's also a challenge that long-term survivors face within the LGBT community because there's also often this perception that the community itself has shifted its priorities. And now that people aren't dying in droves from AIDS, that they don't really need services anymore. And of course, that's not true. There's also some socioeconomic issues that are challenges for those who are aging with HIV. Many people never expected to live to retirement. It's, those in the pre-HAART long-term survivors, the average lifespan was like maybe 2 years, right? So people just didn't think they would ever get to this age where they would actually be aging and being an older adult. And they didn't save for retirement. And so many are living on SSI or SSDI, where financially they don't have the resources they might have had they not been diagnosed with HIV. There's a gap in work history because for those in their 20s and 30s who are just starting and launching their careers, uh-oh, that was a sign. I better hurry up. Their career trajectories derailed, and so there's gap in their work histories when they got sick, and maybe they might be able to work now, but they're not current in their skills, and of course there's a great deal of ageism in employment, and try finding work when you're in your 60s in an urban area. It's very, very difficult. Those who want to work can't find work. But some have to remain unemployed or in low-paying jobs because they can't afford the medication unless they stay in these low-paying jobs and qualify for government-funded medications. There's the lack of affordable housing, as mentioned before. And Dr. DeVries talked about logical family. The issue about logical family is that many of our logical family are close in age, that it's not the same as when you have biological family where you have children and grandchildren and you have a younger generation coming up. A lot of logical family is roughly in the same age range, and so as people are aging, they're also losing their family support system. And that is a real issue for those who end up alone and losing their social network. And long-term care is not available for those on disability. I want to talk about the challenges, and I'm just scratching the surface here. We have some very, very effective therapy that's available to address the sustained trauma. These are all evidence-based therapies. The trauma-informed therapies of Seeking Safety is an example of a manualized treatment that's very effective. There's mindfulness-based stress reduction. There's cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioral exposure therapy, which is very, very effective for treating trauma. There's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and pain management treatment, all of which really, really helps to overcome some of those effects that I mentioned earlier around sustained trauma. There's also peer support services that are very therapeutic. All of the programs that Candace talked about earlier. There's also Let's Kick Ass, and ASS stands for Acquired AIDS Syndrome. acquire AIDS survivor syndrome, ASS. Sorry. And there's a very active chapter here in Palm Springs for LKA, and all of the other social events that help people break out of isolation and connect with each other and come together around shared experience. What is resilience? Resilience embodies the personal qualities that enable one to thrive in the face of adversity. People who are aging with HIV have experienced great adversity. And resilience describes a process whereby people bounce back from adversity and are able to go on with their lives. And this is what we want to promote through all of our services. We need to reduce stigma. We need to help people find employment. A shout out to SageWorks. It's an amazing program to help older adults develop computer literacy. We need to change self-perception so that people gain confidence in returning into the workplace. We need to do a better job of making retirement homes LGBT welcoming, and we need to be proactive around our own care, eating properly, exercising, taking care of health needs. That's important for everybody who's aging. It's specifically important for those who have a chronic illness. Very quickly, because I know I'm like done. How many of you know about the Blue Zone research? Yay! I've been talking about the Blue Zone research for over a decade, and when I first started talking, there was like nobody who knew about it. This is my favorite research. It's the research done by Dan Bruttner and his team around centenarians. It's around what allows these people aged 100 years and older who are living independent, healthy lives, what do they have in common? And the Blue Zone are these places on the map where there was the largest concentration of centenarians. And they are Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, our backyard, and Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. And what all of these really disparate places had in common was this. This is the lesson. And so this is what I want to leave you with. It's, in terms of healthy aging, it's so important for all of us, particularly LGBT aging. We need to keep moving, have a purpose in life. We need to be able to balance work and play. We need to eat wisely, eat less, eat more vegetables and plant-based food, stay social, participate in something that's spiritual, not necessarily an established religion, and stay connected to family, however we define it. Those are the key ingredients to healthy aging. So in summary, we need to build social networks to reduce the isolation. It's very important that we process traumatic loss and that we reduce HIV-related stigma, and we need to mitigate detrimental health effects of the virus and the medications, which also have negative effects. And Dr. Singh will talk about that in a sec, by making healthy lifestyle choices. So, thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Dr. Singh. I work at Desert Age Project, and I serve persons living with HIV, infectious disease, and primary care patients. And I'm here to talk about the medical aspect. Jill did a great job about the psychosocial and psychological aspect, but there's a medical part too. So I'm here to talk about that. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask me a question, and then I'll jump back to my slide. So thank you for Lisa Middleton and this program for having us here. Let me start with my first slide, which is the topic is the care for the aging patient with HIV. The objectives of my presentation today is to describe the care continuum for adults aging with HIV, discuss the treatment options. You can hear me? Sorry. All right. and identify the manage and common conditions that affect aging population more. So aging with HIV perspective, I'm going to start with an example of a 74-year-old patient of mine. We'll call him Mr. H. He was diagnosed with HIV in 1984. And in those days, he said when he got HIV, it was almost unexpected that you live beyond 5 years. So here it is, 2019, and he's surviving and thriving still. So we have multiple patients like that in our practice, especially in Palm Springs. This is Mr. H's medical history. His CD4 count is not bad, it's 440. His viral load is undetectable because he takes his meds. He has hypertension, chronic kidney disease, osteoporosis, depression, history of skin cancer. And then he has 9 other medication along with ART, which is antiretroviral therapy, which is basically 1 pill once a day now. But we have to remember, although HIV medication is just 1 pill once a day, he has these other things that are going on that has him on 8 other pills. So one of the main things I want to talk about today is the polypharmacy. Other medication he has is testosterone, bupropion, which is an antidepressant, cholesterol medication, etc. He quit his job when he was diagnosed with HIV. He reports isolation from loss of his friends, which he lost to HIV and other conditions. He survived this long, but not everybody was as lucky. So HIV in the United States, I would say Jill touched upon that very quickly. More than 50% of our persons living with HIV in the United States are over 50 now. In New York City, 1 in 5 people living with HIV are age 50 plus. Why do we talk about age 50? Because it's about, at this age is when changes of HIV infection in older people, but with age 50 years is around the same time because HIV ages you earlier. This is what we talk about 50. Usually geriatric age we consider is 65. There's a lot of comorbid conditions, geriatric conditions that are more common in persons living with HIV. So this is a care continuum. So very important to get diagnosed with HIV, but not only that, after that we need to be linked to care. After that we need to be put on antiretroviral therapy and then be suppressed. All that takes time, so it starts with diagnosis. PrEP in older adults, I wanted to actually touch upon this because I got a question earlier, and I don't know if I can say the name, but it's Jonathan Goldman asking, is like, hey, Jonathan. So I'm going to address this question because it pertains to my slide here. A friend was denied of PrEP by Kaiser as he's over 65. So he wanted me to comment on that. And I think what Kaiser is a closed system, and they have very set rules about, following the guidelines. Most of the studies, and this is one of the problems with PrEP in older adults, is that they were done in younger adults, and there are very little representation in older adults, and which is not just the PrEP research, but most of the research does not represent older HIV aging community that well, which is why Desert Days Project, we're doing an HIV and aging research project, which actually Jeff Taylor is right here. We work very closely with HARP-PS, HIV and aging group, and we're actually looking at that aging population. Our research is solely on 65 and years older, and we're trying to include more and more HIV aging population in our research. So what we can do for your friend is, if he can come and establish care with us at the doc for PrEP, we will get him on PrEP. Is that, we can talk more, but that's, yes, okay. Because we can get patient assistance program, Gilead, we work closely with them. We also have now Truvada that's going to go generic soon, as well as the new government initiative, PrEP Access for All, starting next month. This is huge, this is gonna happen. All the insurance will have to cover PrEP. So this is a golden time for PrEP coming up. All right, so psychosocial issues, Jill beautifully touched upon those. I'm not gonna repeat those. Why is a person living with HIV have a little bit more problems getting suppressed? And in care. So one of the reasons is that response to ART is different when we're older. So sometimes we're diagnosed older when we're with HIV, and by the time the T cells have dropped a lot, so it takes longer for them to recover. So that's one of the reasons that the comorbidities is higher in person living with HIV when they're older. Also, the rates of viral suppression is high. When they do get on medications, they do beautifully, they take it, they're more compliant, but the comorbidities and cognitive impairment, polypharmacies that reduce the efficacy of the medications and being on care. The another issue is that we have not done a very good job of researching what to start in older patients with HIV or the person living with HIV. So we don't have designation of, oh, if you're older, start this particular ART, this is safer. So that's another area where there's lack of research, which we're actually going to do. Concurrent medication, polypharmacy, I talked about it. 5 or more prescription medications is polypharmacy. There's a lot of drug-drug interactions we have to think about. So like I said earlier, not only just the ART, but other prescription medications for nervous system, cardiovascular, gastroenterology, endocrine, blood disorders, and then supplements. A lot of patients don't consider over-the-counter supplements as medications, but they all interact. They all add to the burden of liver and kidney. And so we have to always ask if you're on any antiretroviral plus other medication, herbal, over-the-counter, because they all add up. What can we do as clinicians, as people taking care of patients? We should all be assessing them for not just ART, but also over-the-counter medications, and then also consider prescribing quality measurements. There is recommendations for medication that should be avoided in 65 and over. We should look into that. There's a condition called HIV-associated non-AIDS condition, which is also more prevalent in person living with HIV, especially aging. And some of the things you can look at here is kidney disease, coronary artery disease, heart disease, bone disease, cancer, liver disease, neurological disease, and then polypharmacy. Geriatric syndromes are so common in older person living with HIV, including difficulty with activities of daily living, cognitive behavior, impairment, depression, visual impairment, falls, hearing problems, incontinence, difficulty, mobility. Increased risk of bone disease. A lot of us were on TDF before the TAF, the safer version of Truvada came out, so we have a lot of bone disease. HIV-associated neurological disease, this is a condition that she also touched upon a little bit, but HIV infection penetrates the brain. It can cause early dementia. So ask about any geriatric condition, assess the functional status, and in summary, across the continuum, older adults are most likely diagnosed with HIV need to know and think about screening and prevention of other conditions, comorbidities, meditations, age-related changes for ART, increasing propensity with HIV-associated, non-associated conditions, and then functional status, always assess for that because just taking ART is not enough. Any questions? I was on time.
On time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. In fact, you were abbreviated, so I appreciate that. We have time for one question, besides the one that you already addressed, which I appreciate. The question is, HIV and aging, such as AIDS survivor syndrome, seem to focus on mental health. Mm-hmm. How do we address cofactors of psychological as well as lifestyle and physical limitation due to long-term medication side effects? So either of you, please, and then we'll get ready for the next panel.
Well, one thing that I want to say before I turn it over to Dr. Singh is that it's very important to look holistically at an individual, and the mental health and the physical health are inextricably intertwined, and you really can't separate them out. So when you are addressing mental health issues and building resiliency, you're also strengthening the physical body at the same time that you're reducing the depression and anxiety that always surrounds dealing with a medical condition. So I just think it's very important to think about them together. Mental health, psychosocial, lifestyle changes, behavioral changes, all of which support health in an umbrella concept.
I would echo that. We actually, on the first visit, we always ask the patient, and if we see any signs of depression, anxiety, any social issues, psychosocial, we refer them to psychologists as well as psychiatrists, so that process starts from the get-go, because mind and body connection, if you're depressed, you're not able to take your medication, that affects the numbers, that affects my numbers, and I like my patients to be undetectable.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Gover, Dr. Singh. Welcome our,
Thank you.
Thank our panelists. All right, Riku, Robbie, Patty, and Dr. Jill, will you come on up? The next panel is going to be talking about culturally competent healthcare, and there have been some questions that have been submitted already about that as well. We have a varied set of speakers here, folks, clinical folks, folks working on advocacy in this realm, folks doing training on competent healthcare. I'd like to start out from a local perspective. Dr. Hingston, hello. LGBTQ cultural competency in healthcare could mean a lot of things. So let's start out with you introducing us to the concept, what it means when we talk about LGBTQ healthcare competency, and specifically what it means for older folks in our community.
Okay. I think the culturally competent healthcare for our community really needs to remember that many of us have years and years, and some of us decades, of mistrust, stigma, discrimination within the healthcare system. And even though today it's much better, there are still big issues that remain, especially for our transgender and gender diverse communities, non-binary people. I actually recently had a dear friend of mine who is transgender have a horrible experience at a local healthcare facility. And I think oftentimes, especially in Palm Springs, we feel like we live in this bubble of safety and everybody's LGBTQ, and you know, we have a lot of resources, and yet this happened here in our community, and it was quite shocking. I think competent health care, like Lisa said at the beginning of this, is about dignity, and it's about respect. It also means that we are more likely to go to the doctor, to do follow-up visits, to see a therapist when we feel like that person sees us for who we are. We need to feel okay to talk about our sexual lives. I know personally for me, going to the gynecologist for decades, and every single time I go, are you sexually active? Yes. Do you use birth control? No. And then you get that look. And especially as a young lesbian, that made me not ever want to go, because I didn't want to deal with that every single time I had to go to the gynecologist. And if providers don't know the right questions to ask, then people in our community are way less likely to go and take care of their health. And then not only LGBTQ people, but then you add racial, ethnic, cultural minorities. So people of color going to healthcare facilities where typically it's a white, middle, upper class, heterosexual focus base. I mean, even as much as when you walk into an office, the art on the wall, the pamphlets they have, the magazines they have in the lobby for you to read, all of that is so important. And people notice that. We notice that when there's nothing that looks like us or nothing that pertains to us. Also, as far as healthcare providers go, just to understand that certain communities, racial, ethnic, minorities have specific issues, and they may view healthcare, especially mental health, very differently from white people, and so they attach different just different ideas to certain symptoms, and that, you know, we don't, I know for me, I hear a lot from transgender people, I'm so tired of having to educate my therapist. I'm so tired of having to educate my doctor. So part of being culturally competent is, at least if you don't know, that you're willing to ask the questions and know the right questions to ask.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction to the topic, Dr. Hingston. Patty, I'm going to turn it over to you. Actually, you lined up perfectly. Thank you. Because Patty, my question for you is, you work for Watermark Retirement Communities, which is a multi-state senior services company that's really been on the forefront of trailblazing initiatives to move forward LGBTQ competent care. As a private company, it's really remarkable. Can you tell us a little bit more about those efforts, why they were so important to Watermark, and as an example to other companies that are doing this work in senior services?
Sure, and thank you for having us here today. Really appreciate being here today. As Hillary stated, we are a Watermark Retirement Communities, and we have 60 communities across the country in about 25 states currently, and one of them right here in Palm Springs, as a matter of fact. Several years ago, we recognized that, yes, we are training our clinical teams and our staff across the country in a diverse approach to healthcare, but we recognized that there was one piece that was vitally missing in our training, and that is the piece of the LGBT. And so we reached out to SAGE, and we began to partner with them in putting together a training program that we could take across the country. And we are in the process of doing that. We have 60 communities, and we are about 50% complete now with training our associates, our management team first. We go to our management teams. SAGE trained 8 of us, to train our own staff. I'm one of those trainers. And we take it to the community. We go on a road show and we do our training about about inclusiveness in caring for our seniors. We recognize that we're an organization that cares for seniors, and we were missing a really important and vital piece to caring for all seniors. Right, and so we've taken on that challenge to do that. After we train our management staff, we worked with SAGE to create a training for our 6,000 associates across the country as well. So we have an in-house online training program that every associate is required to complete. And so that is in process right now. So it's an ongoing, there's turnover of staff, right? There's turnover of management teams. So some of our communities that we have already trained, we've gone back again and completed the training again. I think you asked also, why is this important to us? Again, we're in the business of caring for seniors, and we don't pick and choose who those seniors are that come into our community. It is everyone's right to be cared for equally.
Thank you, Patty. It's so inspiring and exciting. So, Riku, I have a question for you. Following from Patty's remarks, actually, as a person working with companies such as Watermark in training their staff on LGBT aging concerns, and as a person who's training with SAGE as a SAGE care trainer, can you tell us a little bit more from your perspective on working with service providers themselves? How are folks taking the training? How are they learning? Tell me.
Cool. Yes, we'll do. Good morning, everybody. It's still morning. How's everybody doing? Just curious. Because it feels like there's so much learning, so it's intense. So just curious how folks are doing. If you need to stretch, please feel free to stretch. But yeah, just curious how many folks are service providers in the room. Cool, yay. So if you haven't been trained up by Sage Care, please do talk with us. It's been a pleasure. Actually, Jill and I attended the same Train the Trainers in Chicago. So that was cool in 2017. So I've been a trainer since then, and it's been phenomenal. It's been a really great experience to do outside of my day job, which is I work for the County of Los Angeles. I used to work for the Commission on Human Relations, doing trainings on a diverse range of topics around equity and inclusion, kind of focused on sexuality and gender. So this has been a cool crossover to then work with the aging branch as the LGBTQ information and assistance liaison. Recently, you may know that the state of California mandated California Department of Aging mandated all of the area agency on aging folks and service providers to collect sexual orientation and gender identity data voluntarily. So you may now volunteer, and you will be asked, as mandated by the state, your sexual orientation and gender identity when you're accessing services. How many service providers have already received such a training? Yay! So the law passed a couple years ago, so for those who are not yet there, that's okay, we can get you there. Sage Care has an online training, and we can also do some in-person work, but that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, is comparing the time that when I first got trained up and attended my first training. It was continuation of the Sage Care certification. So it was like an hour-long sort of review. Everybody was super informed and eager, had awesome questions that were very nuanced, and like, I was so excited. I was like, experts, this is so easy. This is like I love this. I want to work here full time. And then in a short amount of time, another training I facilitated was, I think as a result of some complaints from community. It was, I think, the trans-specific training, and that was different. It was a different organization in terms of their focus wasn't like trans community. It was a housing organization, and it was a larger group as well, and it was only an hour. So I think I was challenged as a facilitator. So this work has encouraged me to sharpen my skills, how to include a lot of information in a short period of time and get people what they need. So I'm the kind of trainer that's like, oh, go ahead and interrupt me, please, please, please. I need to know what you need to know, because I only have like this much time, and the slides are awesome, but I'm 42. Let me just say. So I am of the PowerPoint generation, but also love pen and paper, love the flip chart. So I am much more interactive trainer. I want to hear what you want to know. I think I said that already. So it's been super rewarding to hear people tell stories about their personal experiences with family, friends, loved ones. And it's also been quite profound to hear people talk about clients in a way that they recognize in the moment that they are underserving people, that people are not receiving what they need. And then connecting that to people's own experiences of inequity and discrimination is powerful, super powerful. Whether that's about gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, national origin, age, all those ways. There's so many ways that we can connect. So yeah, I'm trans also. I don't think I said that. My pronouns are he, him, so I'm very out in life. And I'm also queer identified, so both of those things I say sort of in the beginning of these trainings, so it's also it's very vulnerable. You get very vulnerable very fast. Oh, I do. And that's, again, rewarding and also difficult to recharge from, I think, so I'm glad that I don't do this full time. I honor your work so much because it seems very difficult to hear people talk about experiences of isolation and discrimination within the workplace, who are also serving clients who are also isolated and discriminated against. So what I mean by that is LGBTQ staff who will come out in the training or sort of come out, and I think that those moments to me are so difficult. So my favorite trainings have been those organizations where you can tell people feel comfortable to be out. And so too are the community members, the clients, everybody feels good. And you can really feel the difference just energy-wise. I'm sure you all know the difference. So yeah, check.
Thank you, Riku. And actually, before we move on to Robbie, who's going to talk on a slightly different note about advocacy, I want to stay on training here because a couple of questions have come up. Patty, one that I handed over to you, I think is a really interesting question that the person noted it's one thing to train the staff, and then it's a whole other body of stuff when you are dealing with the other residents. So from your perspective as a clinician, tell us a little bit more about your experiences there.
It's a great question. The question, as Hillary says you can train your staff, but what can be done to make the setting, including residents, more LGBT inclusive and accepting? And that's one of the very first questions that we encountered as we began our training. Okay, great, we can do all of these great things with our associates and our staff, but what about the other what about the residents? How do we reach them and educate them about what it is we're doing? So the first thing that after we did a couple of trainings, we recognized, okay, we need to be a little bit more transparent about what we're training our associates on. Make sure that it's out there, that we're training our associates this is an initiative, this is something that we're taking a stand on and that we believe in and that we're going to support throughout the country. And so that was the first thing that we did is, okay, we can't do this behind closed doors and training our staff. It has to be out there and open. The next thing is, you talked a lot about different programs and, the organization that you work for here in Palm Springs that, has all different kinds of programs. We're doing the same thing in our communities. We have what we call our Watermark University programs, and we do very specific trainings and teachings and education in our programs for our residents that include LGBTQ. And so that's one way of reaching our residents, our other residents who may not be as well informed as they should be. Thank you, great question.
Yeah, terrific question. And then one other question pertaining to the training is somebody asked, do we feel that the Sage Care webinars are as effective as in-person training? Another really strong question and one that we struggle with. We do evaluate both and actually have found that with the same amount of time, people are learning online at the same effectiveness level as they are in person. The difference with in-person, though, is that we often have more time to spend in interaction, as Riku talked about, answering people's questions and really getting to the heart of where people are at. And so to the extent that there's more time to do training, in person does have some more effect. But of course, we can't train every person in person, so there has to be a balance. And Patty described that taking the approach of the management first with in-person training and then the associates online is something that we're trying to find that balance of effectiveness. So Robbie, let's switch gears slightly. Robbie Rodriguez is here from Equality California. Moving away from direct services and into the legislative front, and as we think about culturally competent healthcare, Equality California has done a ton of legislative advocacy work in California. We can all be very grateful for your work. I want to talk specifically about your work on culturally competent healthcare and HIV. Can you tell us more about the work that you all are doing on that front?
Yes, hello everybody. As Hillary mentioned, I'm Robbie Rodriguez. My pronouns are he, him, his. I've been with the organization for 4 years, and in those 4 years, I'm the program director, so I oversee all of our programmatic efforts for the organization up and down the state. To date, Equality California has sponsored over 140 pieces of pro-LGBT legislation, so I'm going to talk about 3 bills specifically today. And I'm going to read because they're laws and I don't want to misread anything, misstate anything. So, so the first one is just happened this year. It's SB 159. This was the PrEP and PEP access expansion. This was sponsored by Senator Wiener, or authored by Senator Wiener and Assemblymember Todd Gloria. SB 159 will reduce barriers to accessing HIV preventative medications. This legislation will authorize pharmacists to furnish PrEP and post-exposure prophylaxis PEP to patients without a prescription. Pharmacists are already authorized to furnish birth control pills or flu shots without a prescription, so this is kind of in line with that. The legislation will also prohibit insurance companies from requiring patients to obtain prior authorization before using their insurance benefits to obtain PrEP or PEP. And this was signed into law by Governor Newsom on October 7th of this year. A major advantage to having pharmacists involved in prescribing PrEP is that pharmacists are easily accessible and are located in almost all communities across the state. Pharmacies can also be more approachable for people that are less inclined to go to a clinic. The ability of pharmacists to administer flu vaccinations is a prime example of the positive effect when states expanded pharmacist roles providing preventative medications. For example, the odds that an adult would receive a flu shot increased by 7.8% in states that allowed pharmacists to immune patients. In order to provide more easily accessible healthcare services, we must better utilize community pharmacists. So that's one piece of legislation. In 2017, we had another piece of HIV legislation that many folks might not know about, SB 239, which was modernizing discriminatory HIV criminalization laws. This was also by Senator Wiener and Assemblymember Todd Gloria. So SB 239 modernized California laws criminalizing and stigmatizing people living with HIV to reflect current understanding of HIV prevention and treatment. It eliminates HIV-specific criminal laws that impose harsh and draconian penalties, including for activities that pose no risk of transmitting HIV. The bill is supported by public health officials because laws that criminalize HIV discourage people from getting tested and from seeking treatment, which impedes public health objectives of eliminating transmission of HIV. SB 239 would make HIV subject to laws that apply to other serious communicable diseases, removing discrimination and stigma for people living with HIV and furthering public health. And this was signed by Governor Brown. And then lastly, I wanted to do a plug for SB 219, which was the Seniors Long-Term Bill of Rights. So SB 219, authored by Senator Scott Wiener, strengthened protections for LGBT seniors living in long-term care facilities against discrimination. So examples like refusing to use preferred name or their proper pronouns, denying admission to long-term care facilities, transferring a resident within a facility to another facility based on anti-LGBT attitudes of other residents, or evicting or involuntarily discharging a resident from a facility on the basis of their actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or HIV status. And thankfully, this was signed by Governor Brown. That's it.
Great, thank you, Robbie. A lot happening, and as we know, laws on books and laws in practice take some time, which is why we're so appreciative of the folks who are trying to make these laws, the service providers, to make them living documents as we experience them. I want to go back to, I realized that there was a question that came in earlier around integrating LGBTQ services into, the question was related to all senior centers, and I think it's applicable here on this panel. The idea that we have and that you hear some of these panels talking about around training, quote unquote, mainstream service providers is really critical and something that SAGE takes very seriously. groups like SAGE, other service providers that are working specifically with LGBTQ seniors can't serve everyone, right? We have an amazing affiliate in the desert here, but we have 30 affiliates across the country. It's a drop in the bucket. Where we really are trying to have an impact in every community in this country is by getting LGBTQ information out to providers who are working with seniors, whatever in whatever circumstance, in whatever community. So that's a senior center in the valley here, right? It's an assisted living up in the Central Valley, right? We're trying to get to providers wherever they are, because LGBTQ seniors, as we know, live all over the place, all over the country. And so to that end, here in Palm Springs, the Mizell Senior Center, not an LGBTQ specific senior center, does an incredible job of working with the LGBTQ community. In fact, I had a conversation with their executive director, Wes Winter, a couple of weeks ago, where he estimated that about 50% of the people they serve are LGBTQ. So while it's not specifically LGBTQ, the important thing is that we're trying to reach providers everywhere about these critical issues. So we have time for I think 2 more questions. Thanks. And so, Patty, I have another follow-up question for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your continuing care, retirement services, right? So tell us a little bit more about your experience around how folks are taking this training who are working with memory care services.
So the folks who are getting the training, one of the things that are, their training is no different than anyone else, other than we have come to recognize that we may have many seniors who have a cognitive impairment, who are in our memory care communities, who may not have come out to their family or to their friends. And so now, as they've aged and with this cognitive impairment, they are. And so now there's this education of how do we now communicate what is happening to the family who may be totally unaware of what their loved one has been through their whole life and who they are. And so there's lots of very interesting questions that have come up across the country of how do we manage this? How do we deal with this? And it's on a case-by-case basis, based on the families, whether it's their biological family or those that they identify with as their family. So it has become a conversation, a very open conversation with us across the country too, in how to care for our seniors with cognitive impairment who may or may not have come out. So that's an interesting piece too.
Really important and complex. Our last question, Robbie, this is for you, and I think that we're going to have a policy panel later as well, but I think that as a representative of Equality California here, this would be a great one for you to just touch on. What are the top 2 or 3 active bills that are moving right now that folks here in the community can lobby their representatives to vote for?
So we're in between cycles right now, so there really isn't anything to my knowledge, but there are probably some issues that people should be aware of. The first is that 2020 is going to be a very big year for all Californians in the country. Not only do we have a big election coming up, but we do have the census. So the LGBT population is considered a hard-to-count community for a variety of reasons. Historically, well, for one, we're not actually included in the census metric, but we do know that LGBT people are part of every community that is also considered hard to count. We're people of color, we're in transitional housing, we're low income, et cetera, down the line. So we do want to urge that the intent of the current administration to undercount California is a real threat, and so we want to make sure that everybody participates in the census and that you promote the census to all of your friends and neighbors and family, because California does have a lot at stake, and we do, so many of our community rely on the public aid programs that the census helps fund, so we want to make sure that we do participate. That didn't exactly answer your question, but I did want to make sure I plugged the census.
Really important, and folks will hear a lot more about some federal work as well as some local legislation when Michael and Councilmember Middleton return to the stage. So thank you all very much. Let's thank our panelists here. And we'll transition to the next panel where we'll be talking about housing, which has, there are a number of questions that have come in about housing specifically, so I know the folks are eager to hear from the next panel. We're going to be focusing on housing, a very big topic, and we're going to be talking about both affordable and market rate, all under the rubric of what we consider LGBTQ and age-affirming housing. And so we're going to start out with Dr. Jason Flatt, who is a researcher on this very topic. Hello, Dr. Flatt. You've been researching safe and affirming housing for LGBTQ seniors for a number of years. Tell us a bit more about, briefly, what the research shows and how solutions related to specifically age and LGBTQ affirming housing are critical for our community as we all get older.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to start off with sort of the big piece of why is housing important for LGBTQ seniors. And what the research has shown is that more than half, and it's actually much higher for our minority and trans community members who are aging, but they've experienced discrimination in housing, whether it's a rental or purchasing a house, right? So high amounts of discrimination, which have created fears as you get older, and you may need to either move, or you can no longer afford the current housing, or it's not right for your needs as you're getting older. So that raises a lot of concerns for seniors as they're aging and being able to access affordable, but also to live in an environment that's going to be inclusive and welcoming. We think of housing, when we really think of health, that housing is one of the social determinants of health. So you can put that right up there with access to fresh foods, clean water, an income, right? So housing is just as important. So when we look at sort of how do people's health look when they're accessing housing, we see it's important for basically everything. Your ability to manage chronic conditions, especially for those living with HIV. We found for people that maybe have experienced chronic homelessness, that affordable and inclusive housing is extremely important. It helps them to care, have access to resources, better manage their mental health. And so I've had a unique opportunity over the past 2 years to do some research with Open House. And you'll hear from Karen Skoltetti right next to me about some of the work happening there. But what we found from the research from LGBTQ seniors that are living in affordable and inclusive housing is that really it has increased their access to services. It's increased their social resources. So inclusive housing, you are building community. You're building support structures. You've already heard from other presenters that our community lacks some of the same resources as our cisgender and heterosexual peers. So a story that we heard, for instance, was a resident had broke their hip, had a fall, and they were having a lot of difficulty with care. The entire floor really centered around this person to help them heal. Bringing meals by, offering to do laundry when they were doing their own. So really, and checking on them, providing support, asking if they need help getting to the doctor or anything with daily life. So really, you can see here, people talked about, this is my home, I can heal faster living here in an inclusive place, I don't have to worry anymore, I don't have to educate people about what it means to be an LGBTQ person, right? So all of those, if we think of sort of the broader extension of health, we're starting to see those same trends. Also, the housing is important for people who want to age in place, who need access to more services. So the ability to have sort of what we would call is supportive housing. And this will include often staff there that can help you get to the doctor, help you access resources. Maybe you need help with paying a bill. They can find programs that you would be eligible for that could help you offset some of the financial challenges you might be facing. So really, when we think of inclusive and affordable housing, it's health. It's basically equals health. It's a huge part of it.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Flatt. Tripp, I want to turn it over to you. You know, you are here representing the LA LGBT Center, yes. And they had a truly remarkable, groundbreaking initiative early on. Triangle Square yes. Was the first affordable LGBT and age-focused development of its kind in the U.S. And soon, you didn't stop there, okay. And soon you'll be opening a brand new residence in the Anita Mae Rosenstein campus. Can you tell us a little bit more about the communities and what information would folks who may be interested for themselves or perhaps somebody in the LA area, how could folks be involved in these communities?
Those are great questions. So thank you. I'm really glad to be here. There's been a lot said today that is really pertinent to, you know, housing, affordable housing for the LGBT community. The one thing that really sticks out for me, because we're talking about providing robust, service-enriched housing that is really speaks to our community. And one of the things that I've learned over the last few years, especially at Triangle Square, which has anybody heard of Triangle Square Apartments in Hollywood? First affordable housing for the LGBT older adult community, built in 2007, is that when we're creating services for our community, they want to leave behind their values, their experience, because many of our residents, especially at Triangle Square, we have a few who are at Stonewall, but who have been a part of the movement for over 50 years. And so to share that experience is really vital to, you know, when we're talking about LGBTQ communities. And I think when Triangle Square was first built, it was really new. Nobody had ever done this before. So nobody really knew what to expect and what we were looking at. And what we found is that it's a very vibrant community, and the challenges that we still face in affordable housing is that we cannot build exclusively for the LGBT community. Fair housing does not allow us to do that. So we have to keep our services really focused on the LGBT community. As our CEO says, gay it up all the time. Gay it up, you know. Make sure that our communities are, you know, it's reflective of our history. So we encourage, what was great about Triangle Square was that our community really rallied. Like, we'd never done this before. So the LGBTQ community really came out in full force to support this housing. The new housing that we're building, the Anita Mae Rosenstein campus in Los Angeles, and if you're there, I ask you to come and visit our campus, is an intergenerational campus. And our new building will open in about a year. And so in regards to that, I may be getting a little off topic here, but affordable housing, in my opinion, is one of the biggest issues we face, especially for the LGBT aging community. That is LGBT friendly and welcoming. And so what my lens is, right now I'm looking through the lens of leasing up this new building, is that the goal is to like fill that wait list with as many LGBT applicants as possible, because we can't discriminate. And so it's about really rallying the community and getting everybody out there to be a part of it. Because it is intergenerational, and we're looking at, you know, multi-generational sort of programming. That's also really important, because it goes back to what I was talking about, that values and our history is our legacy. And that's really important to LGBT older adults. So as we move towards the lease up, it's involving the community as much as possible and getting every LGBT organization in the city and county of LA involved, any agency that works with LGBT older adults, to get involved with the housing project itself, to make sure that we're all a part of this. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's really sort of my feelings.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Tripp. You did. Karen, I want to move over to you. Karen Scoltetti, the Executive Director of Open House, which is in San Francisco. You have some really laudable goals, and I'm going to name them here, and then I'll ask you to tell us a little bit more about them. The goals are that you will find folks, or you are working toward folks to be able to live in safe and stable housing that is affordable to them, that folks be welcomed and treated appropriately by housing, social service, healthcare providers throughout each stage of their life and across the entire continuum of care, and that folks are engaged with and supported by communities of their choice. And with that, you have also open housing in San Francisco, LGBT and age affirming. Can you tell us more about those buildings, how they relate to the goals that you have? And as I asked Tripp, for folks who may be interested themselves or community members in San Francisco, how can folks get involved?
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I literally flew in about an hour ago, so it worked out. Way to go, United. You surprised me. Sorry if there's any United fans in the crowd. I'm Karen Scoltetti. I've been at Open House for about 3 years. And Open House is an organization that's been around for 20 plus years with those very aspirational goals that Hillary shared with you. We have a 2-building project that we partnered with Mercy Housing on that has 119 units of LGBTQ welcoming, affordable senior housing. I think we were the largest until this week, when Sage yet again had to beat us by opening their new housing in New York City. I see you, Michael Adams. No, congratulations for what you all did this week. So we had our first building open in late 2016, and then our second building, we actually did the lease up this summer. And across the 2 buildings, the percentage of LGBTQ people is right around 55%, which we were thrilled by, because as you've probably heard, San Francisco's housing system, very easy, really not that many people interested. It's going great. No shortage of affordable housing. And so we have in addition to the fair housing rules that apply and not being able to discriminate, we have to use a lottery system in San Francisco, which I could talk more in depth about, but the idea that you can do first come, first serve, and some of the other things that folks have been able to do in other LGBTQ housing across the country is not the case for us. So we're actually very, very happy that we're at that 55% number. I think that there's a lot of things I could say, but I am clear on the time limits. But a couple of quick things that I will say is I think it's really incredible and important that we had the services panel come right before us, because I think one of the things that's really critical is thinking, if we fight really hard for LGBTQ welcoming, affordable senior housing, and we should all be out there fighting for that every single day. we don't want to then find that people can't age in place in those communities and in those units. And what we're finding from the data in San Francisco is that LGBTQ seniors are underutilizing available aging services in San Francisco, right, where everything is, just gate up to who knows what level. And so what that tells us is the traditional or the mainstream aging services that exist aren't working for us. And that's not a shock, probably, for people sitting here. But what it means is then we don't have the right services in place to serve people in that housing to make sure that they're going to age in place. And we've done a lot of training. And we have service providers all the time wanting to do training. And what we're finding is that it's going to be necessary for there to be deeper partnerships between mainstream aging services and providers like us and folks in this room if we're really going to get this right. So I could give a whole long diatribe on that, and I won't. But to say that we've got to build housing, and then we've got to have services that make sure we can stay in them. The other thing I'll say is that community building is a complicated thing. Because we are communities within a rainbow, right? And so even in our building, we've had incidents of transphobia that have happened from LGB people who are in our community. We have bi-invisibility that happens with people who are living in our building. And so building community is a really complicated thing, and I think the important part is, do you have the right providers there in the building and the right representation of the residents themselves to try and figure out what's it going to take for us to really feel connected in community. And so we're working really hard on that. I can share and go on more, but I'm mindful of time. You are absolutely welcome to come visit anytime that you're in San Francisco. We would love to have you. I'm happy to show you around. We have 1,800 people on the wait list for 40 units in our first building. We have 1,300 people on our wait list for 79 units of our second building. So there's no openings at this minute. But that said, we're happy to have you come look, and we've really committed to providing really robust housing assistance to the larger LGBTQ community in San Francisco, because what I've said is, of course, we're celebrating every single queer senior who got one of those units, and our heart and commitment are to the 3,000 plus sitting on a wait list still trying to figure out where do I go next. So with that, I'll shut up. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you, Karen. Wow, that wait list is staggering and a real evidence of what we're facing here. Lauren, let's take a more local look. You, for years, have been working passionately on a really exciting development right here in Palm Springs called Living Out. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, how the idea took shape, and what's to come in the next few years? And similarly to the other panelists, what folks can do who are interested in living there?
Sure. So let me first give you my background. I'm a businessman, as my husband calls me, business guy. And I've been a commercial real estate lawyer and a real estate developer for the past 35, 40 years. Built primarily hotels, casinos, and other commercial projects. So I have that background in bricks and mortar. I've also served on the board of the Los Angeles LGBT Center since 1993. I served as its co-chair for 9 years. I've been side by side with Lori Jean, the CEO, so I've learned how to gay it up, as she says. And I've been aware of this issue that was going to be facing our community since before I went on the center board. I just knew that the demographics were going to be such that we were going to age, and notwithstanding AIDS and HIV, that there were going to be a lot of people who were going to be looking for how they were going to live as they got older in comfortable environments. So I've talked about it for a long, long time, and frankly, my partner and I, he's a straight guy, we've been partners for 42 years. We sold our last casino. We announced the sale 2 years ago, and he said to me, come on, you've been talking about this for 30 years, let's go do it. And we struggled, frankly, for what we were going to build. I wanted to build, frankly, a CCRC type of community because I knew that those needs were there. But I function in a for-profit world, and the finance opportunities were very, very limited, if existing at all, to lend me money to build a facility for an operation that I didn't know how to do. But the money was there to build a retirement community that was an independent living community. All the banks loved the idea, they understood the idea, but they knew that I knew how to build essentially a casino hotel. And what I'm building is a retirement community that is essentially a hotel where people will own their own units, but all of the services that would be available to someone in a resort kind of environment will be available at Living Out. So that's why I started with that, and I hope that over time, if this is successful, and I'm hoping initially it seems very successful, that I will get the expertise and the credibility to build other for-profit kind of environments for LGBT people around the country, because there's a real lack of them. And the same issues that face LGBTQ people in affordable housing or lack of affordable housing are the same in for those people who can't qualify for affordable housing. There really are no options to live in a comfortable retirement community. People will say to me, well, why would you do this in Palm Springs as it's a comfortable retirement community? But social isolation happens as you get older, whether you're living in a comfortable environment or not. And so what I'm trying to do is create a community. I come out of this background from the center, and I was also on the board of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, of our community helping our own. And so while I appreciate that lots of other kind of mainstream organizations are trying to understand how to help our community when they live in mainstream communities, I want to provide an option for our people to live with each other. And in an environment where we don't have to teach cultural competence to the residents because, you know, they get it. I've also had to, while thinking about all this, address the issues that Karen referred to of how to, you know, provide the services to people. And so I've met with Desert AIDS Project, I've met with the center here, I've met with the center in LA, to consider all those issues, and particularly the issue of, I'm hoping people will live there and then want to stay there and get home care rather than have to move into an assisted living community. And so I've dealt with that issue. I was shocked. I read an article in I think it was in the New York Times about the issues facing LGBT seniors, and there was a person who was quoted as saying, you know, I live in this very comfortable LGBT community, affordable community, but I need home care, and I'm afraid to, you know, to hire someone because they're going to come in and hit me over the head with a Bible. And where was this resident but in Triangle Square? You know, and I'm on the board of the center that is Triangle Square, and I was shocked by that. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and Michael, this might be an initiative for SAGE to establish an LGBT home care company, a national home care company. And so that's an issue that I've addressed as well. In any event, my project is going to be 105 condominium units. I made it condominium because I wanted the homeowners to be able to control the environment there rather than me or somebody who would own it and rent it to control that environment. I wanted it to be in Palm Springs where there's a vibrant LGBT community and not in isolation as some other places have been. I put a lot of thought into what this will provide for people. It will have a dog park, a dog hotel, a pet daycare facility for the residents. It will have a pool, a resort-style pool, an exercise pool, pickleball courts, a restaurant that Susan Feniger will be involved in, a bar, a piano for the piano bar. It'll have a movie theater, a gym, a lounge for coffee in the morning. And I really hope to make this a community for our people so that they can live comfortably and in their own skin.
Thank you, Lauren. I'd like to live there.
Yeah, I'd like to.
So a few people have asked variations of this question, and I'll address it to all of you, whoever. It's a hard question. There are many folks for whom they don't qualify for affordable housing. They can't pay for market rate, or their rents and so forth are getting beyond their fixed incomes. For those folks, are there any suggestions around finding LGBT age-affirming housing in that sort of in-between level?
I was just going to say that in my experience, there are very few options. So I keep urging people to do what I'm doing. It doesn't have to be a luxury community. In fact, I'm looking at other communities around the United States, and the projects that I would build there would not necessarily be a resort community that Palm Springs lends itself to. And people have said to me, are you afraid that somebody else will take your idea? And I said, well, let them take it. I'd be thrilled, because there's so much need. But I'm not aware of very many options for people that are kind of in the middle level. That is the million-dollar question. And, I've been doing affordable housing for a number of years, and it's a great formula. But one of the things that, I always try to tell people, it takes a long time to build housing. You still have to cobble together all the different finances to build this. So all I'm saying is innovation is really welcome at this point. And I know that in Los Angeles, we're starting to see some innovation around creating more affordable middle income housing. Moderate income housing is really the key. And it sort of goes back to even at Triangle Square, that $1 increase in your income can change everything. It can change your rent amount. It can change if you're eligible for services and things like that. So we've looked at roommate matching. That's one of the things that people have gotten creative with. In Los Angeles right now, they're looking at accessory dwelling units as being another possible way to provide affordable housing. But again, this is not LGBT specific, right? So I'm just throwing this out there that if anybody has any innovative ideas on how to make this happen, it's really welcome at this point, because it really is a huge problem.
I was hoping Tripp would solve it before I had to weigh in.
I'm trying.
Big disappointment there. Yeah, no. Part of it is let's start talking about income inequality in our country and getting at it, because it's setting us up to be left out and screwed over. So think about who you're voting for, all that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. I'm not supposed to say anything like that. I won't. San Francisco is trying a below market rate model where when folks build new market rate housing, they're required to build, to have 15% of their units at least be below market rate. And so they have to have units that they hold a lower rent for. It's doing something. It's way less than I think what we need. Again, newsflash, there's a housing shortage in San Francisco and across the country. So it's not scratching the surface of what the need looks like, but I think the model isn't terrible. It's a ringing endorsement. I think it's a decent model. And I think, I'd be curious to hear Michael and Lisa talk about this from a policy level too. I think it's worth looking at from a state sort of perspective on that, right? Because housing isn't just about San Francisco, it's about what's happening across the state, and it's not just about states across the country. So I think that that's an interesting model to explore. There are some folks coming together to build sort of communal living. I don't think I'm supposed to call it that, shared living type environments. There's a really cool one being built in like North Carolina that I'm blanking on the name of. But yeah, I think innovative ideas are welcome and needed generally for what are we doing about escalating rents, and essentially just say, we don't care about what happens to you once you fall below a certain level of income, and that's a structural problem. Sorry, I'm just very uplifting.
I just want to add one thing.
Put me back on the plane, yeah.
On a policy level, it would be great to see the LGBT older adult community as a protected class under fair housing. It's not going to happen at the federal level. There's no way Donald Trump and Ben Carson would do that right now, but at the state level it may be. So, yeah, you got to talk about that.
Michael has a solution. He's got it solved. So just ask him any more questions about that.
Right. It's not a terrible idea. That is where we are in the state of middle income housing. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Lorna, this is specifically for you, and I'm now empathetic to all of the times that I've used acronyms that other people don't know what they mean. I'm going to read the acronyms because I don't know what some of these mean. Will your development be in Palm Springs, RMCC, and will it be on leasing land from the, I think it's Canilla tribe, or not?
I don't know what an RNCC is.
Rancho Mirage.
And I don't know what that means.
Rancho Mirage.
Oh, will it be in it's in Palm Springs, on Tuckwitz, and at the corner of Tuckwitz and Hermosa. And it will be fee ownership. The land is fee ownership.
Thank you. And then the last question we have here is, there are a number of Friendship Village continuing care communities across the country. Friendship Village was, Michael mentioned at the beginning, the subject of a lawsuit for denying a lesbian couple a residence. The question is, are they all hostile to the LGBTQ community, or is it just the one in Missouri? It's a good question. I don't know, but here's what I can tell you that I do know. You've heard a lot about SAGE offering training. Open House does as well, and Karen, I'm going to ask you to comment a little bit about your training in the metro area up there. SAGE's training comes with, for groups who take our training, they come with a credential, meaning that every year they have to have their staff retrained, and every year they earn a credential, which says that they can put a sign on their door that says, we've been credentialed, we've trained this amount of our staff. It allows us as an objective, measurable way to say, at least the staff have been trained here. None of the Friendship Villages are SAGE Care credentialed, so I can tell you that. But there is the opportunity. SAGE is trying to implement a way for our community to find welcoming, open residences. Along with that, the SAGE and HRC Long-Term Care Equality Index, as Michael noted, will offer a rating system of sorts that has a whole bunch of things, not just training, but how are their policies, what are their services for the LGBTQ community, and so forth. That initiative is off the ground. The first index will happen next year, and publishing it 2 years from now, and we hope that it will continue to grow and that communities avail themselves of getting rated in that way. So Karen, if you could close us out, tell us a little bit about the training that you're doing in the San Francisco community, how we can sort of avoid the Friendship Village situations, what you all are doing in that realm.
Sure. So what we've been talking a lot about, and a real focus area for us and for me, is going from this is a very catchy way to say it because that's important, going from training to transformation, which is, we've trained probably every aging service provider almost that you could identify in San Francisco. We've trained assisted livings, we've trained nursing homes, we've been there multiple times. We're doing training right now on the LGBTQ Bill of Rights that was mentioned earlier because it's being implemented in San Francisco. But two things that I think are really important. One is this piece about collecting sexual orientation and gender identity data, SOGI data, which is now kind of required, suggested across the state, but hasn't been implemented, is really important because it lets you ask the question, are LGBTQ people being served equally in this facility or this model of care? And if you can't answer that question, it's hard to motivate people to do things and behave in a different way. And that's got to be the outcome we're working for, right? It's not good enough if people get trained, but you're still not going there because you don't feel comfortable, or you're not going there because they haven't really changed practices. So SOGI data and training on SOGI data is one of our top requirements. How do people ask those questions? How do they collect the data? And then do they actually look at the data to see what it tells them about service use and equity in your area? The second part is we're really developing what we're calling an organizational readiness assessment and inviting partners who we've now partnered with to say, you really want to change the way you do your care for LGBTQ people. That's awesome. To do that, we've got to partner with us in a really deep way. And so we're doing that with an adult day healthcare program in San Francisco, as well as Unlock, which is an organization that developed the PACE model, where we're developing an all-new program at Open House. But both of those organizations, we asked to go through organizational readiness assessments where we looked at things like, what does the physical structure look like here? What do the pictures on the wall look like? What do the bathroom signs look like? What do your HR forms look like? Do you have support for LGBTQ staff? It's not dissimilar to the index that we're being talked about, so that we can start to say, here's some structural things that are going to have to shift about the way that you're doing business to make a difference. And that's really a direction I see us going, is really taking on organizations who truly want to partner in a deep way so that we can really find out what do we need to change about the models of care. And this is, do I have one more minute? I think one of the most interesting things that we're finding is a lot of the problems, I think, are more subtle than just straight up transphobia and homophobia. That's a big problem, straight up, we can see it coming. But I think that the culture we've created in aging services and housing is in very much direct conflict with many of the cultural values that we hold as an LGBTQ community. Aging services and housing tend to be, and I say this with love in my heart for everyone who's out there in mainstream aging services, because that's my background and where I came from, I think it's extremely paternalistic and top down. And I think we assume that as providers, we kind of know better about the model of care. And guess what? Amazing activists, which I bet almost everybody in this room are, do not like people saying to them, we know better than you, we'll tell you what you need. What we like to say to that, I got to get a swear word in every time, is fuck you, we're not participating in that system of care. And so that paternalistic sort of top-down piece and the lack of ability to give feedback, ideas, what you liked, didn't like, some of those things I actually think may be creating greater barriers than some of the obvious, people are straight up homophobic and transphobic. One of the things we did as part of our readiness with Unlock, and I value them so much as a partner because this is a very brave thing to say you'll do, is we sent secret shoppers, essentially, who were open house LGBTQ community members who pretended they were going to sign up for services but knew they weren't. And they came back and told us about what they found. And some of the things that they told us that I wouldn't have seen, for example, they said, I don't like that I saw there's an anonymous line you call in if you have a grievance. I said, well, what don't you like about that? You don't have to say who you are. They said, the last thing I'm going to do is call some bureaucratic hotline and leave a complaint. If I have a complaint, I want a person to come out, look me in the eyes, and not tell me, oh, this has never happened before, because we know they're lying if they say that, and instead say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you told us about this. when it happens here, here's what we do. And what a shift, right? I mean, this was like a really profound example for me where we said the whole way we've set up communicating and that we're treating people in senior services is really, really in conflict with a lot of the values we hold dear. The way we treat people who aren't family members, right, in aging, housing, services, and care is totally misaligned with family of choice kind of ideas. So I go on and on to say, I think that there's some deep core values and cultural ways that we've just fallen into in aging services and housing that really could be shifted and make things better. And guess what? We're going to make the system of care better for everybody when we do that, right? But we have a lot to teach and offer. And now I will stop. That was more uplifting, right, than the
okay.
It's not terrible.
It's not right. It's not terrible. Okay. Thank you very much to our panelists. Wonderful. And thank you for those of you who traveled early this morning. I'm going to bring up our last panels and you will all be quite familiar with at least one of the faces again who will be on the stage. Councilmember Lisa Middleton and Michael Adams, the SAGE CEO, who will be talking about the state of the law. With that, I will turn it back over to our very expertise last panel here. Councilmember Middleton.
Yay. First, can we get a round of applause for Hillary, who has just moderated 3 panels? That is pretty impressive. So we're down to close to the end, and we've got, I think, a really good panel to finish with. I'll pick up on a theme that we were just talking about. In terms of housing, one of the critical places, and it was identified, there is a need for more affordable housing, and some of that is being built. We are building right now the first affordable housing unit that has been built in Palm Springs in over a decade. That's going in at the corner of San Rafael and Indian Canyon. There are going to be, I believe it's 64 units that will be available on an affordable housing basis. We acquired land recently as a result of the settlement with GRIT, and we have already identified that that we want to use a significant amount of that land for affordable housing projects, and we're beginning conversations with agencies that do affordable housing to partner with us. There's nothing that I can take and announce at this point, but it is a priority for this city council to see to it that we make it easier for individuals who want to build affordable housing. There are lots of folks who are interested in coming into Palm Springs and building very high-end homes. And we're pleased to see that people want to build within our community, and those homes are being built as well. The struggle comes in the middle. And right now, finding market forces and entrepreneurs that want to come in and build in that middle is difficult throughout California. And the governor has identified that new housing is something that's incredibly important. We should, in California, be building approximately 180,000 housing units just to keep even. We're building about half that in the state. And so long as we're not able to build enough housing to keep up with the growth that's occurring, then we do fall farther behind. Part of that is going to require that we need to make it easier for developers to build homes, particularly developers that will build homes in that medium market. So we're looking at How can we reduce our fees? How can we make it easier for them to move through the approval process? In Sacramento, the legislature is certainly looking very clearly at how do we make it easier for people to build in California. Some of that needs to come back to all of us in the community to recognize building new homes is something that is important for all of us. And if our attitude and approach to the person who wants to build in your community is, why don't you go somewhere else? We will have some folks who will go somewhere else. So it's a struggle to make sure that we build in a way that is sustainable, that we build in a way that respects the environment and our community, but we need to be building more homes. People are going to continue to come to our state and to other places, most particularly because of all of the things that we've talked about today. Given a choice between living in a community that you know will be affirming, one that you know that will understand who you are and gives you an opportunity to create community, you're going to want to go there. I look forward to the day that those communities are in Ames, Iowa, that they're in Duluth, that they are in every community across the country. But today, in the 21st century, those communities are largely in places on the coast and places where the cost of living, unfortunately, is among some of the highest. And as I said in my op-ed this week, some of the most difficult, heartbreaking conversations I have been with individuals who have been out for 30, 40 years. They are living on a very fixed income here in Palm Springs, renting usually, and frightened to death that they're going to have to move back to the community that they grew up in, a community that still feels like a stranger to them. So with that, as an intro, let me remind everyone that we have some really great people that have been here all day today that will be around afterwards to provide more information. And most of the panelists are going to be here until about 1 o'clock. I would like to also give a big thanks to every one of the panelists. We did not pay a dime for anyone to come and make a presentation today. They did all of this on their own cost and their own expense because they believe in this community and believe in what we're doing. And I want to do a big shout out to a couple of people who are here that have some wonderful organizations that were not a part of the panels today, but we will not miss you in the future. Jack Newby from the Jocelyn Center in Palm Desert, and Beverly Greer from the Neurovitality Center here in Palm Springs. So with that, I'm going to ask Michael Adams to come up and to talk about the state of the law nationally, the federal laws, and some of the actions that are taking place in other states, and touch on California. And then at the end, I'm going to come back and talk to you about Senator Scott Wiener's LGBTQ Senior Bill of Rights that was passed and signed into law in 2017.
Okay, and I want to apologize that I will not be able to stay for the last hour. I have a flight at 1:30, so I'm going to be heading out shortly after speaking. And because I'm not going to be here, there were a couple of questions that folks asked that I otherwise would have talked about in that time at the end, but let me just very quickly respond to these two questions before shifting into the policy discussion. One was a question asking us to explain more about SAGE and specifically are there services or benefits that we can avail ourselves of individually. So just to answer that briefly, I'm implied that both Hillary and Kimberly Jones from SAGE are here and happy to talk more about this in the last hour. So SAGE is not a local service provider, so it's different from Center of the Desert and Desert AIDS Project in that we don't have local on-the-ground services. What we do focus in communities across the country, including here, are community education programs like this. And some of them are so-called self-starting programs like Sage Table that was referenced earlier by Candace, which is a program where younger and older folks can come together and break bread. And you can find out about how to start one of those yourself on our website at sageusa.org. We have a community education series called Aging Well, which is a series where we come together and talk more specifically and personally about how we can age well as individuals. And we'll be bringing the Aging Well program to Palm Springs in the late spring. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please talk with Hillary or Kimberly. Second question I wanted to respond to is, does SAGE work at all with AARP, and if so, how? The answer to that question is absolutely yes. We've had an ongoing working relationship with AARP for more than a decade that consists of several things. It focuses primarily on community education. So last year, SAGE and AARP co-published a guide called Prepare to Care, which is a guide for caregivers in our community. We also have built a close partnership with the AARP Foundation, so they are supporting our own data collection work so we can learn from the housing developments that we are opening. And I'm really pleased to say that AARP Foundation has recently made the decision to endorse the SAGE HRC Long-Term Care Equality Index. And having that stamp of approval by AARP is going to be an important step. I would say, I think, in terms of public policy, AARP National has been, frankly, a little slow to come to the table in stepping out explicitly in supporting LGBT rights legislation. But fortunately, and SAGE has been working with AARP for years, fortunately that started to change in June when AARP publicly endorsed the Equality Act. And I'll talk a little more about the Equality Act. That was a big step forward, and that will make a big difference. So that's AARP. So let me switch into some policy conversation, and as a council member indicated, I'll start with a focus on the federal level and then talk a bit about California. And the context for the federal discussion is the reality for all of the reasons that have been discussed today. Many older folks in our community have, in fact, a greater need for elder services and elder care than older Americans in general, because we don't have the same kind of support systems and networks that other folks may have with adult children, etc. So, but while we have that greater need, the data indicates that we, elders in our community, are in fact 5 times less likely to access the services we need. And the reasons for that are the very things that have been discussed today. Fear of discrimination, fear of being mistreated, concern about, can I safely be out to these folks, right? So this is the conundrum that we need to work on and change. And the reason why that fact is relevant to federal policy is because the federal government is the big player in local elder services around the country. Every year, the federal government distributes $2 billion that end up in local aging offices and state aging offices that are then redistributed to our nonprofit service providers to provide those services. And so getting those federal dollars and the legislation behind them to focus on our community is critical, because the need is great and the barriers are high. And the situation that we're starting with is not a great one in that regard. Those $2 billion are structured and funneled, and the expenditure of them is determined by something called the Older Americans Act. The Older Americans Act, while it does have provisions for certain kinds of older populations who face special challenges, nowhere acknowledges the special challenges that LGBT older folks face. In fact, it doesn't even acknowledge that we exist. And this has been the fundamental and essential focus of SAGE's federal policy work for the last decade, to seek to change that and to amend the Older Americans Act so that it explicitly addresses the needs of our community and prioritizes us for those services. The Older Americans Act needs to be reauthorized. It's reauthorized generally every 5 years, and that reauthorization process, which is going on now in the latter part of 2019 and will continue in 2020, is the opportunity to seek to amend the Older Americans Act. Now, I think it's no secret to any of us the political context in which we live. The gentleman who sits in the White House, the folks who control the US Senate, it is a mean feat to accomplish that in this moment. Having said that, and I won't go into the specifics here, we are making some surprising progress in that regard. And later in the spring, we will have more to report, but there is the potential to make some progress on LGBT inclusion over the next few months in the Older Americans Act. So stay tuned and we'll talk more about that. And we'll come back to you perhaps at the Aging Well program in the spring and let you know where that stands. The other context that we're operating in at the federal level, of course, is the fact that we have no federal law that explicitly provides protection from discrimination for LGBT folks. This is something I hope we all know that we have been working toward and struggling for many years, and we have not accomplished that yet. What we do have is during the Obama years, there was some piecemeal progress that was made through federal agencies and regulations, etc., which was helpful. The challenge, of course, is that during the Trump administration, the Trump folks are seeking to roll all of those protections back. And they're making some progress. Just to give you two examples, in 2017, when they first came into office, the Trump administration tried to remove LGBT older adults from something called the National Survey of Older Americans Act participants. That's the survey that figures out who's getting federally funded elder services and who's not, so those services can be retargeted. We worked our butts off to get our community into that survey during the Obama years. The Trump folks tried to take us out in 2017. I'm really proud to say that we fought like hell, and we reversed that, and we are still in that survey as of today, which is a great thing. But as I think we know, their attacks on our community and others are relentless. And so one of the things we're dealing with right now are a series of efforts by the Trump administration to carve out exemptions from whatever discrimination protections we have, to carve out those exemptions for religious organizations and religious providers, which is a major problem for our community because, for example, we've heard reference, and Lauren talked earlier about continuing care retirement communities. 85% of CCRCs in this country are run by faith-based organizations, like Friendship Village. Now, some of them are fine and welcoming to our community, but some of them are not. And the notion that religious providers who are receiving federal funding would be licensed to discriminate against our community is just outrageous, and it's a big danger, right? And so that is something that we have to continue to be vigilant about and fight about. Similarly, we have made some progress in the courts, right? Over the last decade, our community, our organizations like Lambda Legal and National Center for Lesbian Rights have gotten a number of federal courts to rule that our community members are protected from housing discrimination, for example, under the Fair Housing Act. Some of you may know of a case brought on behalf of Marsha Wetzel. Marsha Wetzel was an elder lesbian who was living in an elder care community in Niles, Illinois. And she was treated horribly by other residents, subjected to terrible harassment, and the staff did nothing to protect her from this. Lambda Legal took her case and sued and challenged that as a violation of the Fair Housing Act. The lower court ruled against us and said that LGBT people aren't protected by the Fair Housing Act. But when the case went up on appeal, she won and we won. And the court ruled that we are, in fact, entitled to protections under the Fair Housing Act. That was important progress, but the Trump administration and conservative folks are really pushing back on that notion that we are protected under the Fair Housing Act and under laws, federal laws that prohibit employment discrimination. There are 3 cases at the Supreme Court right now in the context of employment where the court will decide whether gender discrimination protections, which have been interpreted to protect us, do. Those cases were argued in October. We'll have a decision by June. We have a conservative Supreme Court, right? It's risky business what is going to happen there. If we lose those cases, then in all likelihood, the progress we have made, for example, in Marsha Wetzel's case, will eventually be reversed. And those principles that apply in housing will get reversed. So we've made progress, and we are at risk for sliding backwards because of who we have in the White House and because our federal courts are becoming increasingly conservative because of who we have in the White House, right? So not to put too fine a point on the matter. Having said that, there is opportunity for progress, and we are making some progress at the federal level. As I referenced earlier, we have, I would say, a healthy fighting chance to make progress this year in some new helpful provisions in the Older Americans Act. That would be, as I referenced earlier, tremendously important progress. And we have the Equality Act, which all of our organizations, HRC, SAGE, and many others, have been advocating for. That is a federal piece of federal legislation that would prohibit employment, housing, and public accommodations discrimination for against LGBT folks. That the Equality Act passed the U.S. House of Representatives. I think we can predict that it is not going to pass the U.S. Senate, given who controls the Senate right now. This is why elections matter. We have the House. If we have a friendlier Senate and a friendlier White House, we will enact the Equality Act. And finally, we will have anti-discrimination protections all across this country. And so that is something that we can and need to work toward. And I'm pleased to say that SAGE worked closely with the authors of the Equality Act to insert language that is specific to LGBT older people into the Equality Act. So if it is enacted, there will be absolutely no question that it prohibits discrimination in nursing homes and assisted living, in senior centers, in any place that we receive services as older people. So that's an important one, not just to watch, but to work for. Every time you are asked to do something to support the Equality Act, please do it, because it's really important. Let me switch to California. Folks who live in California, I'm a former California resident, are blessed to live in the state as LGBT people and LGBT older folks because this state is in the lead when it comes to providing legal and public policy protections for LGBT older people. Equality California has been a great leader on that, and it was great to have Robbie here earlier. SAGE has partnered closely with Equality California in that regard. A couple of these things have been referenced, but I just want to say briefly, there are 4 laws that have been enacted in the last several years that are very important. A couple of them have been referenced here already. The LGBT Long-Term Care Bill of Rights, right? And the council member is going to talk about a little more about that in a bit. Very, very important that we be protected in long-term care. A piece of legislation that requires aging service providers to collect data to actually figure out to what degree they're serving us and not serving us, enacted here in California. A mandate for LGBT cultural competency training of providers, enacted here in California. And importantly, a piece of legislation that establishes that older folks in our community are a priority population for state-funded aging programs, enacted here in California. This is tremendous, tremendous progress. The trick is that these laws are only valuable to our day-to-day lives to the extent that they are implemented and enforced. And that is not automatic. That requires hard work. Some of you may have noticed there were a bunch of media stories last fall after the training mandate was enacted, where that law says that aging service providers have to provide training and collect data. So a bunch of stories appeared, and I'm sure this was not by accident. These are stories that were organized by folks who were not our friends, telling sad stories of little old ladies in Meals on Wheels programs who, shock of all shocks, were being asked what their sexual orientation and gender identity is, right? So when you read that kind of sensational story in the media, it makes it sound like a terrible idea, right? But the reality is, for decades, we have been asking people in service programs all kinds of questions that are important to know so that we can craft those programs. We've been asking people their age. We've been asking people their race. We've been asking people their ethnicity. We've been asking people about their health conditions. LGBT status is just one more thing, but we have some obstacles to overcome, right? So that's about implementation. I want to say we have some great friends in that regard. The California Commission on Aging, which last year held a public hearing on LGBT aging issues right here in Palm Springs, has been a great partner in that regard, and will continue to do so. We had the Commission had a conference on aging issues earlier this month that was hosted by the LA LGBT Center. LGBT issues were front and center, and they will continue to push for us. Similarly, the California Department for Aging has been an ally, and after the training mandate was enacted, SAGE provided training to the staff of the California Department for Aging and how to effectively implement this law. Also, I want to put out a plug. We have the Governor's Master Plan on Aging is in the works right now. There are public hearings happening across the state. It is critically important that we as a community be actively involved in those hearings, that when those hearings happen, folks from our community need to be there and standing up and speaking out and saying, that these laws need to be implemented. Ed Walsh is here somewhere. Ed's in the back there. He's got his hand up. I'd say, please talk with Ed to learn more about what's going on around the Governor's Master Plan so that we make sure that we're present there. I'll just say a couple more things in closing, which is we are lucky. Those of us here in California are very lucky to be in the state, and this is not the norm, unfortunately. As a council member indicated earlier, there are many parts of this country where these kinds of advances have not been made. There are 26 states in this country that provide, at the state level, not one shred of legal protection against discrimination for LGBT people. 26 states, that's the majority of the states in this country. We have a lot more to do. And having said that, because I always want to end on a positive note, is that, and we are making progress. And SAGE has been working not only with Equality California, but with LGBT equality groups all across the country. Just last summer, the Illinois legislature enacted legislation that makes not only LGBT older adults, but older adults living with HIV a priority population for state aging programs. The governor signed that legislation. That's a big step forward. We've made big progress in Massachusetts. We have a landmark bill that has been introduced in Rhode Island. We've got some really exciting stuff going on in Pennsylvania. So this is the work as a movement, as a community across the country that we have to do, is we do need to create a world where it is safe and welcoming to be LGBT and older, no matter where you live. AARP did a study last year that found that 29% of LGBT older people live in rural areas, 29%, and that only 1 in 10 of those 29% of rural LGBT elders reports having access to any services or care that could be seen as even mildly LGBT friendly, right? So that's the work in front of us. I mean, that's the work that as a whole, as a community that extends across the country, we can do, and we're doing it, and we're making progress, and we will continue to do it together. So thank you.
Okay. We are about to the end. I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to try to quickly answer. One is, please explain how and if Riverside County has improved on the Ellis Act protections for evictions. And I did have a chance to speak with the folks at the County Office of Aging, and they are trying to step up on that, but it remains a significant issue that we have too many evictions there. And I think that the other person and place that we can go is to County Aging Office, as well as Supervisor Manny Perez's office, to provide help for the county to get more effectively involved. We also had a question regarding LGBT individuals who are incarcerated, and that is very clearly a significant issue. I am not expert in that area. Equality California did carry a bill this year. It did not pass through the legislature that would have provided protection to transgender individuals who are incarcerated, to ensure that they had a right to be housed within a facility that was gender appropriate for them. And that bill did not pass and continues to face steep opposition. And again, my congratulations to Equality California for the willingness to take on tough bills, and this was one of those. I'm going to close, though, with something that's good, and that is a bill that was passed in 2017, and that was the SB 219, sponsored by Senator Scott Wiener out of San Francisco. And Senator Wiener has taken on numerous issues for our community and numerous really tough issues. This bill has been referred to as the Senior Bill of Rights. It's really specific to issues around individuals who are in residential care facilities or skilled nursing care facilities. A residential care facility is a place that you go to live. Generally, they are always multifamily buildings. Frequently, you have a studio or a one-bedroom apartment, and there may be some communal meals that are served within those residential facilities. They provide help to you in performing the daily events of life. Washing clothes, eating, doing all of the things that anyone would take and do, but they do not provide health care. They do not have nurses on staff to work with individuals. So those are residential care facilities. Nursing care facilities are providing clinical assistance to their patients. This bill covers both of those, and it provides protections based on sexual orientation, HIV status, gender identity, and gender expression. The bill made it illegal to deny admission. It made it illegal to transfer or refuse to transfer a patient or an individual based on any of those four statuses, to discharge an individual, to deny people the right to choose who their roommates are going to be. And where rooms are being assigned by gender, that an individual will be assigned to a room that is based on gender, based on their gender identity, based on their gender expression as they define it. It prohibits residents from harassing, from demeaning individuals based on sexual orientation, HIV status, gender identity, and gender expression. And that happens. Restrict a resident's right to associate with residents or with visitors, including the right to consensual sexual relations with the person of their choosing. The section made it precluded a facility from banning or restricting sexual relations based on who you are having sex with. It does allow a facility to say, we do not allow any sexual relationships to occur within our facility. I'm not sure how they're going to enforce that. And lastly, it made it illegal to deny or restrict medical or semi-medical care that is appropriate to a resident's organs or bodily needs, or provide medical or non-medical care in a manner that similarly situated individuals would receive. So as we all know, and as Mr. Adams said, passing laws are one thing. They still have to be enforced. So I want to give you 3 organizations that you need to be aware of. If someone is in a residential care facility and there is a concern regarding the treatment they are receiving there, it is the California Department of Social Services that is responsible for enforcement. If they are in a skilled nursing facility or healthcare facility, it is the California Department of Public Health that is responsible. And it is, by the way, the California Department of Public Health that has the authority under certain circumstances to remove a license. Lastly, if the issue is one of discrimination, it is the Department of Fair Employment and Housing that has responsibility for investigation and enforcement. If you don't know who to call, and you think there's a problem, you may call me and my office. I will not be able to fix everything, but if the question is, I don't know who to call me and I will try to find out who it is that you need to call. A couple of last thank yous. We did an awful lot of work in scheduling to have Congressman Raul Ruiz here today. He was otherwise detained. But this event, in large part, is a product of a conversation that I had with the congressman about a year ago, along with Dr. Les Sendel, who is on our Desert Healthcare Board. And we got onto this topic of LGBTQ and aging. He immediately picked up on the issues of social isolation, culturally competent healthcare, and the need for affirming communities. So we hope that this is the first but not the last event of this nature that will take place. And we very much hope that this is not the last time, we very much hope this is the last time we have to deal with an impeachment issue. I'm going to say one last thing on SB 219, and I'm not going to be political. I'm simply going to record for those legislators who are in Riverside County and serve Riverside County. In the state Senate, Senator Connie Leyva and Senator Richard Roth voted yes. Senator Jeff Stone voted no on that bill. In the California State Assembly, voting yes was Assembly members Sabrina Cervantes, Jose Medina, Eduardo Garcia, and Chad Mays. Voting no was Assembly member Melissa Melendez. You may want to remember all of that. We are going to have an opportunity for folks to stick around to ask more questions. I began today by saying this was about dignity. We will end. This is about each and every one of us having dignity until that very last day that we have. Thank you all for being here.
What a day. What a day. This is incredible.